All right. So welcome everybody to our European Birds of Passage seminar. I am Marco Rocca. I am the principal investigator of European Birds of Passage. I have the pleasure of welcoming you to our second seminar for this year. The first one was in October about temporary labor migration and domestic work. And today we are exploring a different sector and dealing with temporary labor migration in the agriculture sector. We have a pretty packed morning of presentations, so I will not take too much time to introduce everybody. As a start, I'll just mention that European Birds of Passage is our project and looks at social rights of temporary labor migrants. And just to introduce the scope, let's say, of our research, which might be somehow surprising in particular for the lawyers in the public, because we consider migration not just as in the EU speak, migration from third countries, but also internal migration in the EU. So we cover under the concept of migration both movement of people, which again for other social sciences will be a sort of moment, but for lawyers this is actually different because of course intra-EU migration is actually mobility and not migration. Anyway, this is just to explain why some of our presentations will look also at intra-EU migration, not just migration from third countries. So because, as I said, we have a pretty busy schedule for this morning. I will not take much more time. I will be back at the end of the seminar to close, so we will hear more from me. Just a few points of order. If you wish to ask a question, there will be time for it after each presentation or couple of presentations when they are linked. However, you can also type it in the comments and I will be your spokesperson for asking the question to the speaker. Of course, please cut your microphone and all the usual etiquette for Zoom meetings. And with that said, and without further ado, I will move to our first speaker and the introduction for today's seminar. We are very happy to have Fabiola Mieres from the ILO. Fabiola has extensive experience both on migration and specifically on migration in agriculture. And she is also the co-editor of a very recent book coming from the ILO about social justice for temporary labor migrants, which couldn't be more appropriate for today's topic. So Fabiola, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. If you need to change the slides, of course, you can tell me and I will be in charge of that. You have the floor.
Thank you, Marco. And you can move to the next one so that we don't. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much to the European Birds of Passage project for inviting me. I have the pleasure to get to know the researchers in the project and to be involved in the development. And it's one of my favorite projects, I can say. I think it's asking very important questions. Yeah, you can move it forward. So I hope I won't take too long this morning because we have very interesting presentations to hear. I simply wanted to reflect on this idea that we all got from the pandemic that we all should remember and we probably remember, but it seems it have been left aside or all of a sudden they are not essential anymore. And this, you can move next, Marco, thank you. It is idea that if you remember, agriculture workers were labeled as essential workers during the pandemic. So that was 5 years ago, but lasted a little bit longer. These are some numbers of an ILO report that we did on the value of essential work that really shows you the extent to which all key workers, we call them key workers, essential workers is the same thing, by income groups, showing all sectors and those excluding agriculture. So we're still showing the importance of agriculture, of course, in low-income countries, lower middle income, but in upper and high income too, even though employment there is a bit lower in terms of how the sector has been evolved, but still very important. So agriculture is essential to our lives. We know this, to food that we create, how we relate with others. But there's something that went missing after all these years and all this narrative and discourse about essentiality, because our migrant workers and those in a temporary nature, so you can move to the next slide, Marco. Thank you. Are still suffering from a lot of what in the ILO called decent work deficits. It can be called exploitation and different conditions. So I guess what is very important today, and we continue reflecting on these things, is whether are the conditions that these workers experience, so the temporary migrant workers, contingent or inherent features of such programs. And the reason why I pose this question, which has a lot of different answers depending on how we think about it, is because what we're trying to do in the ILO, even though it's important, is to think about what aspects of the traditional paradigm of temporary labor migration we really need to change to reimagine social justice for migrant workers. And as you can imagine, the social justice literature is very vast, and in some contexts, there are scholars who claim that temporary programs and social justice cannot go together because of these restrictive conditions that these migrants face. So they're limited to integration, as you know, and a lot of other exploitative conditions that are embedded in the program. So we shouldn't think about them with that lens. However, others think that because of the remittances that migrants send to their home families, there is a global redistribution of wealth and income across the world. So why not allow these temporary workers participate in these programs? So these debates, as you know, coming particularly from political philosophy that have permeated migration studies as well. And of course, they have an impact in policymaking and the law. So if we move to the next slide, I only wanted to congratulate Marco on this seminar, and also leave some dimensions of the notion of social justice that we are working with at the ILO in order to reimagine this future for the workers. And these are three. I'll go over them very quickly. One is something that very well studied and that you know and will show in different contexts today, which is how the legal constructions and the regulations continue to be sources of vulnerability for the workers. But here, what I would like to highlight in the research that we have been doing is that this not only pertains to immigration regimes and exclusions from labor laws, as we all know, but they're also affected by international trade rules, for instance, in the case of, ICTs, which affect sometimes less the agriculture sector, but not solely when we consider engineers and highly skilled workers. And of course, in the context of Europe, you have the common agriculture policy. So in principle, international human rights and labor standards apply to all migrant workers, regardless of the length of stay in the destination country and the skill. This is one of our important dimensions that we work on in the UN system, even though at the moment we are being questioned, we are being a little bit under attack, as you know, in the difficult context that we're living. But we do have elements to think about the changing of this traditional paradigm of temporary labor migration and the programs. Another example that we're seeing some progress in some contexts is the changing of employers through what is called visa portability, so untying workers. But of course, this needs to come with other reforms. So in terms of considering the human rights work, and I know I'm among a lot of lawyers here, we have some elements to think about how we can advance social justice for this group of workers. Realizing equal access to opportunities and equal treatment is also very important. And here I really wanted to echo again one of the famous quotes by Stephen Castles, a migration scholar, who reminded us that the failure to grant social rights to any group of residents leads to social divisions that can undermine the rights of the majority. And we are seeing a lot of evidence of this happening with the group of workers that you will analyze today. And finally, how do we move to a fair distribution? How do we consider distributional aspects that bring back this idea of the migrants' value and their contribution to societies? This thing that was very important in their essentiality. And here there are different dimensions, not only that refer to social protection and a lot of policies, but a real understanding of the nature of the labor shortages. Are these labor shortages just numerical in the sense that we don't have enough workers? Or don't we have enough workers at the conditions that are being offered? And that's why the question of whether we can change this context, as I was saying, is it contextual or is it inherent in the programs that we continue to create these shortages so that the workers keep on coming? And I think in the context of Europe, this is super interesting because, as Marco was saying, you also have the mobility dimension, which of course adds another layer of complexity to analyzing the things. So moving to the last slide, Some of these topics that you will reflect today, in particular referring to the agriculture sector, together with my colleague Christiane Kopt, who's probably connected, we brought together an incredible group of scholars who have been reflecting on different dimensions. This came out last week. I'm sharing it with you in case you are interested. There's a QR code that you can download. The book is, of course, open access. But I really want to thank you for your attention now, and I wish you a wonderful conference, and I look forward to hearing all these papers. So thank you very much, Marco. I hope I kept up with the time and not spoken for too long. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabiola. And of course, you were perfect with the timing. After this introduction, we will move directly to the first presentation, which is from one of our very own researchers at the European Birds of Passage project. So Justina Heimann-Mankiewicz will present the next speech. I will just share your slides. So up, there we go. Oh, up. Okay, normally you can see those. Perfect. So I will cut my own mic and give the floor to Justina. You have the floor for 20 minutes.
Thank you very much, Marco. And good morning, everyone. I am the postdoc researcher in the BoP project, and I have the pleasure of discussing the broader context of temporary labor migration and agriculture in Poland today. I deal with quantitative analysis, which means a lot of what I'm going to show you will be graphs. So I hope you've had your coffee already, but bear with me. Well, starting with, I'm afraid. Okay. Thank you. A little bit of the information about migration in Poland, which is important to bear in mind when we talk about migration, even temporary migration as well, or especially. Poland has been traditionally an emigration country until 2013. Between 2002 and 2013, an estimated 3% of Polish population has left the country to go abroad and live abroad. That has changed relatively recently, and the increase in migration has been rapid and relatively recent. So you can see here that in 2018, which was a record year for Poland in terms of the first residence permits, 1 in 5 of all residence permits issued in the EU were issued in Poland. Ukrainians that year were the main group of nationals who received permits in the EU. An important fact here is that 78%, so 8 in 10 nearly, of Ukrainians received the permit in Poland specifically. Currently, we have 2.5 million immigrants from over 150 countries living in Poland. The largest group of those are Ukrainians, which is why the Ukrainization of migration in Poland has been widely documented, but also of agriculture, with basically one study estimating that in 2017, 99% of foreigners working in agriculture in Poland were Ukrainian. That's a stunning number, isn't it? So in general, the reason why it has been so rapid, the increase in immigration to Poland, is also that the access to the labor market has been one of the most liberal in the world. Notably, for temporary migrant workers, it is employer-driven. Now, a trivia is that agriculture lies at the root of this very liberal access to the labor market. So these reforms were introduced to address farmers' requests and lobbying to address labor shortages in agriculture. But I will try, because it's so important, temporary labor migrants are as important to Poland's agriculture as agriculture is important to Poland's economy, which means basically that we need to have this conversation in the broader context of Poland's agriculture. Let me start with a few facts about it. So it accounts for 8.4% of Poland's employment. The value of Polish agri-food exports is estimated at 37.5 billion US dollars, which puts Poland in the 15th position in the world. It accounts for 2% of global exports and nearly 6% of EU exports. And agriculture accounts for nearly 3% of the GDP, which is still larger than the EU average. And I'll show you very quickly what it looks like in numbers and in longitudinal pattern. Next slide, please, because I think it's not working. No, thank you. So you can see how the share of agriculture as a share of GDP has been falling since 1990. Now, next slide, please. What is important to keep in mind is that it's not unusual. A lot of so-called developed countries has been on this trajectory. This is what is shown here. Poland is in red, EU average is in blue. This has been happening as people have been getting more education, as the countries have been transitioning to other sectors. But it is still one of the highest in the EU. So next slide, please. Thank you. Now, interestingly enough, the Poland's level of employment in agriculture is still one of the highest ones. So you can see that in 2021, it was 8.4%, which is twice as much as the EU average. It was the third highest employment statistic in that regard in the EU. What is also interesting is that it's not new. Again, we can see the drops across the board. However, the drop in itself by 3.1 percentage points is one of the highest as well. Next slide, please. Now, zooming in on those shifts and why it was so dramatic. Well, first of all, basically, as people started to leave the agriculture, which you can see in the green line on top of this graph, they started to transition more into services, which experienced the largest increase in terms of the population working there. Next slide, please. And that is basically because of the changes in the human capital in Poland, which has been growing. People have been becoming more educated and leaving the agriculture for other sectors. Next slide, please. At the same time, farms in Poland has undergone a structural adjustment. So we had fewer farms. You can see it in the blue line going down. Even though we're getting fewer of them, we're getting more of them. The orange line going up. Thank you. Next slide, please. And that went in hand with the galloping automation. So the farm machinery used per unit of agricultural land, you can see it's been remarkable and much higher than in terms of other countries, but also in terms of the EU average. Next slide, please. Comparable, or actually on par with that in China, which is much larger, but yeah, that tells you something. It's been remarkable. Next slide, please. Another reason is also that we really don't capture everyone who is working in agriculture in Poland. It's been well known for the fact that there's a high level of family employment, non-salaried employment, but also of informal employment. So according to the DG Agri estimates, let's make it clear, those are estimates, the share of informal employment in agriculture has been remarkably high. So 70% estimated among women and 47% estimated among men. Next slide, please. And that puts Poland in this leader position in that regard across in the EU and in Europe more broadly. Next slide, please. Now, why are we here today is to discuss the share of migrants and the importance of migrants in the agriculture. So whereas we had a decline in the number of people employed in agriculture in general, the number of the foreigners in the sector has been on the rise. Now, the important thing here is that these data from Statistics Poland on employment in the national economy define foreigners, or basically exclude from the foreigners workers who are insured in agricultural social insurance fund. And why is that important? You will see that some people are missing. Next slide, please. I'll explain you why. So people who are insured and work in agriculture in this agricultural social insurance fund are those who work on some form of specific contract, which is called temporary harvest. It's actually harvest help contract, which is a specific type of contract which can only be used in agriculture. It was introduced in May 2018 to address increasing demand for seasonal work during harvest time. It's applicable only for certain types of fruit and vegetables, which were defined in the regulation of the European Parliament in 2013. The important thing is that the helper needs to be registered with the fund within 7 days of the contract signing, and that this contract is concluded for a maximum of 180 days within a calendar year. So it's a temporary type of workers which are not necessarily captured by the statistics that we saw a second ago. Can you click once again? Thank you. Now, a trivia for labor lawyers, but also for everyone who thinks why those data are not included in statistics, but here in the Social Insurance Fund, is that is not a form of employment in the meaning of the Labor Code. It's a form of civil contract governed by the provisions of the Act on Social Insurance of Farmers, which comes with its own vulnerabilities, and Florchuk and Wojcik, I can provide you with reference to that. They have described exactly the types of vulnerabilities that stem from this particular contract. Thank you. Next slide. So, do we know how many foreigners are in fact employed in agriculture in Poland? And I'll show you the differences between the different types of sources. The first one are foreigners working in agriculture according to Statistics Poland. So we saw this increasing graph a second ago. This is what it was. I chose one moment in time, July 2023, to compare these data. This said that 4,103 foreigners were working in agriculture at that time. Next slide, please. When we include the social insurance data, so the farm helpers, this more than doubles. So the temporary, you can see how important it is. Now, this type of contract is only one form of employment for temporary workers in Poland, and we will discuss it in a moment. So our best source about it is the number of documents that are issued by Poland for people, enabling them to work temporarily in Poland. Those data are available from the Ministry of Labor and Social Policy. And when we look at July 2023, and we see how many documents enabling foreigners to work legally on a temporary basis in agriculture in Poland were issued that year and that month, if you can click once again, ta-da! That's basically more than triples as well. So do we actually know how many foreigners are in fact employed in agriculture in Poland? That's an open question. The data from the Ministry of Labor and Social Policy are very clear about the fact that the number of those documents is not equal to the number of foreigners working in Poland. But this is our best bet. For various reasons, people not always who get this document and are proved to come legally work, they don't always come. We'll talk about it a little later. This is our best bet, so I'll ask you to bear with me. We will use those data to observe the trends and the size of temporary labor migration in agriculture. And it's not just 1 year. The previous one was July 2023. It's not just a statistical glitch. The same pattern is observed year later. Thank you. And then, so the question is, temporary migrant workers in agriculture, how important are they? Next slide, please. Well, when you look at the data from the agricultural social insurance fund, it looks like, the trend is declining. So not what we would expect actually. And this stands in contrast to what we saw before based on data from Statistics Poland. But again, we saw that those data do not capture all temporary workers working in agriculture, migrants working temporarily in Poland's agriculture. If we can move next, thank you. So in order to understand actually what is happening, and now I'll take you through that slide. Please bear with me. There are various, so this, I like this slide because it shows you that even though access of foreigners is so liberal in Poland, in terms of agriculture specifically, it is also incredibly complex. So this is basically, and this is a simplified version. There are 4 types of documents that enable or allow a foreigner to work in agriculture on a temporary basis in Poland. In general, everyone needs a work permit, unless there's exception to the rule. But the work permit is still there, and it's a valid document which is issued to foreigners if employers want to hire a person for up to 3 years. It applies to all sectors of economy, including agriculture, and to all third country nationals, which means all nationalities can receive this document, which is an important distinction because, and I mentioned exceptions to this rule, is that there is an exception which was introduced in 2006 called simplified procedure of declarations, which are filed in by employers for entrusting work to a foreigner. And early in 2006, it was introduced to address labor shortages in agriculture and horticulture. It was so popular, or basically effective, that it was expanded to all sectors of the economy 1 year later. Now, the interesting thing here is that it's basically based on the employer's will to declare that they want to hire a foreigner. Then employers need to wait for 7 days to receive the answer. But it's basically a very, very straightforward process compared to applying for work permit, for example. Now, it only applies to citizens of 5 Eastern European countries: Ukraine, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova, Armenia, as well as Russia until 2022, which was removed following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and is currently issued for up to 24 months of continuous work, from initially 3 months, then to 6 months. So you can see that the gradual shift in terms of the time for during which people can work. Another type of document which allows foreigners to work in agriculture temporarily is the seasonal work permit, which I'm sure you're familiar with, in place since 2018. This replaced declarations for seasonal jobs. Now, this is important to understand, because before the seasonal work permit, the main instrument to hire foreigners in agriculture in Poland for seasonal jobs was the simplified procedure of declarations. So no longer jobs that are not defined as seasonal in the Polish law can no longer, sorry, the jobs that are only the jobs that are defined as seasonal can be only the jobs that are defined as seasonal are applicable to the seasonal work permit, basically. And that is applicable to agriculture and tourism, but predominantly has been used in agriculture in Poland. 97% or more between 2018 or 2023 of those permits were issued in agriculture. Finally, there is a new system, relatively new instrument, called notifications on the employment of Ukrainians, and that applies only to Ukrainians, was introduced following the outbreak of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, to manage the flow, the huge flow of Ukrainians into Poland. And that is even easier than the simplified procedure of declarations. Basically, the employer notifies the labor office that they employed Ukrainian citizens. It also is free of charge and applies to all sectors of economy. Now, the important thing here is to bear in mind that those are documents entitling to work. So the first three, on their own, they do not entitle people to stay in the territory of Poland, so they provide the basis for applying for a visa or for crossing the border under the visa-free regime in order to work, which means basically that some people will get this permit, but they will never show up for work, which is why it's not always possible to know how many of them actually in agriculture. Now, this is a vulnerability in itself, because think of it: if you don't know how many, if you can't count those people, you cannot monitor their situation as well. Let's move on, please. Thank you. So how do these documents, the changes in those documents, look across the years? We saw the increase in the statistics Poland data in terms of the foreigners. Now, when we look at strictly temporary migrants to Poland, or the documents issued, you can see that all of them have been falling. So it's not yet clear. Let's focus on the next slide, please. When we sum them all, you can see that that's the general trend. So the change between 2018 and 2023 has been quite remarkable, by nearly 66% of drop in the documents issued to foreigners. Next slide, please. Now, despite this decline, temporary migration has remained an important and relatively stable part of agricultural employment. So this is what this graph shows you, the temporary foreign workers as a percent of total employment in agriculture between 2018 and 2023. That's a lot. Now, just a quick note on the 2021 mark, which is based also on the fact that the number of people working in agriculture in general in Poland has fallen dramatically, but that is also has to do with the fact that the methodology of Statistics Poland has changed. When we look at the specific please, thank you. When we look at the specific, this is the same graph except divided by the different types of permits. You can see that the seasonal work permit has been the most important instrument right until 2021, when the notification for the Ukrainians has been introduced and replaced slightly, as if that's what it looks like, the seasonal work permit. Next, please. Thank you. So whereas the trend, overall trend has been at approximately 6% in terms of the employment has been stable, the importance of the individual instruments has been changing over the last few years. When you look, well, again, seasonal work permits important, accounting for more than roughly 8 in 10 documents issued for temporary work. That's changed in 2022 when the main instrument were the notifications issued only to Ukrainians. And that would make us think that the Ukrainians were still the main source of labor workforce in Poland. And that is not inaccurate. However, as I'll show you in a second, there has been a diversification of people coming into Poland. Next slide, please. What else has changed? A gradual shift from Ukrainization to diversification, but also a gradual increase in the length of stay. Next, please. And I'll show you the gradual shift from Ukrainization to diversification by using seasonal work permits, data on seasonal work permits and work permits, which are open to all nationals, third country nationals. Next slide, please. So you can see for seasonal work permits here, we can see the total number of these permits issued, as well as the number of Ukrainians who received it. And you can see the percentages, how many, the share of Ukrainians that received it in the total number of work permits recipients. And you can see that it has fallen in 2022, but right until 2024 when we have 70%. So the question is, who are the remaining 30% of people who have been receiving it? Next slide, please. When we compare 2018 and 2024, you can see that the old Eastern European countries, so Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia until 2022, and Georgia, Armenia, have accounted for 82% of those recipients. The new countries for 15%. This ratio completely changed. It's flipped in 2024. So let's have a look at those new countries. Next slide, please. And those are pretty far away. So Philippines, Colombia, Nepal, India, Kazakhstan, a little closer, and Indonesia. So no longer only Eastern Europe. Next slide, please. Again, this has been seen when we look at the work permits. You can see the red column shows the Ukrainians. It has been falling gradually over the years, whereas the Nepalese and the Filipinos and even Indians, that has been growing. Next slide, please. Thank you. Whether we can speak about the longer stay, yes, we can. So when you look at the red bar here, this is the time of validity for each seasonal work permit, and you can see that the red bar indicates more than 6 months. It's been growing, and the one for under 30 days down below has been declining. The next slide, please. Now, one way to also understand this, and the data from the Ministry of Labour and Social Policy do not always allow us to understand how the duration of permits changed with respect to agriculture, but we can also see that the growing importance of the notifications can be maybe some kind of an indication of increasing towards a longer stay, as it has not had a valid expiry mark on it. Next slide, please. Another one would be the fact that declarations and the dramatic, well, relatively big fall that we saw in declarations in 2022 has also coincided with the extension of the maximum validity period from 6 to 24 months with continuous work possible. So it's likely that those people who their permit would be renewed next year, this didn't happen, and we will need to wait and see whether that trend continues. Next slide, please. So the caveats I mentioned, the number of documents entitling a foreigner to work in Poland is not necessarily the same as the number of foreigners who work in Poland for different reasons. A foreigner with a valid work permit has not received their visa, or they decided not to take up employment, or they have previously finished work and left the territory of Poland, or finally, a foreigner has been posted abroad by the employer. And I'll finish this presentation. If I can have next slide, please. To show you, you saw this graph before, however, on the right-hand side with this very unobtrusive red arrow shows you, I added the data on the outgoing postings of workers from Poland elsewhere, foreigners, in the in agriculture. And you can see that unlike all the seasonal work permits, the number of postings has actually been going up. We don't know whether those people who received those permits actually went out, but it's quite telling. If we look at the next slide, and that is the last one, this is interesting as it shows that foreigners or third country nationals have been concentrated more in the agriculture in terms of postings outgoing from Poland that they have been in all sectors of the economy. And the final one, please. And this increase has been mostly driven by Ukrainians and Belarusians. Ukrainians have been the number one nationality of people posted from Poland in agriculture. And that will be the last click, please. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope I made it on time. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Justina. For the questions, you will have to wait until the next presentation because it also covers the Polish situation. Please, Kamil. So for the next presentation, we have, and this is really a test of my ability of pronunciation, is we have Kamil Matuszczyk, who is a PhD in social sciences and a researcher at the Center for Migration Research at the University of Warsaw. And he is principal investigator in several projects dealing with care work, migration, and he is an expert on the migration in agriculture in Poland. So I will just share his slides and then let Kamil have the floor. So not this one. Not this one. Oh, did I get it? It's not this one. So I forgot to. Sorry. I am up. This one?
Yeah.
Yeah. There we go. Apologies for the slight delay. Up. There we go. Should be able to see it. So you can switch on your mic. You have the floor.
Okay. Thank you so much, Marco. Good morning, everyone. It's really great honor for me to be here and to present my ongoing research related to the seasonal migrants in Poland. Thank you so much, Justina, for such great presentation. I think it was really great supporting for me, and unfortunately, I can skip some information about, the general overview of the situation in migration. So next slide, please. To be honest, I would like to share with you much more qualitative perspective and explain why I choose this topic, generally speaking, because the general question which I asked myself a few years ago, why has a social policy researcher, because I education, I'm social policy and public policy experts, why has a social policy researcher chosen to analyze the working conditions, especially occupational health and safety of seasonal agriculture workers? And what Justina said, I totally agree with that, but I really like present these graphs from OECD reports from 2018 to show that Poland became the leading country in terms of attracting temporary migrant workers. Of course, this is the graph showing that this is the other temporary workers, but in explanation of that graphs, OECD authors, they put information that this is mostly workers in agriculture and other low-wage sectors. But this is one explanation why I decided to choose the topics, but also these photos, which was took by me. This is the explanation and some horrible situation, almost fatal accident, which I experienced working with Ukrainian workers. And from that machinery, I don't know how to say, this is the kind of platform what you see to pick up the apples on the highest part of the trees. We suddenly, 14 years ago, we suddenly fell from that platform. It was horrible injuries, accidents with my colleagues, irregular migrant from Ukraine ladies and with her daughters under 14 years. So that's why after a few years when I studied social policy, I decided, to come back to this topic and look like more more details as a researcher who has some background related to the social policy, how to solve probably these problems. To be honest, after that almost fatal injuries, we just immediately, to wake up, and we should continue our work because it was we were obliged, to continue our work without any support, without any treatments. Next slide, please. Yes, so maybe I should skip because this is what also Justyna said about the context of Polish agriculture. For me, it's extremely important, the relatively small size of land holdings and, generally speaking, the size of farm sites. In my research, which I will present right now, this is approximately below 10 hectares per farm site. So that's why it's totally different and contrary to other countries like in Germany, in France also, but also when we compare with the United States. So it's really, really teeny business in Poland. And this is a lot of farmers who has, few hectares of production, and they require few workers per season. Next slide, please. Yes, to be honest, I would like to focus mostly on my field work and the project, Horizon Europe project, I claim, related to the irregular migrant workers. I'm responsible for this part right now in Poland, but some general overview, because for my presentation, I decided to use some previous outcomes from project, because this is the longitudinal multi-sited field research, which I conducted in 2019, and still I continue, and each season I spend a lot, approximately 20-30 days at 5 family-run farm sites. Family-run, I mean, this is the, really small, below 10 hectares farm sites. And participant observation, this is the main methods which I use. And this is the really, really rich tools which I can use, to observe and to grasp different aspects, because mostly I covered different issues, like mostly occupational health and safety, because it was my inspiration, but also such topics emerge like the everyday strategies and workers agency, accommodations, and especially the quality of people staying and what farmers propose for them. Role of intermediaries, especially middlemen and informal brokers, but also irregularity. Right now, I try to cover that issue and different shades of irregularity. So that's why I will explain a little more about that. Also, during the presentation, you will see my photo documentation, because this is also an important part for me. This is mostly some elements of my works, like the basket of strawberries, but also some equipments, the quality of equipments, and the context with confidentiality of the workers without showing their face, of course. Production, because I treat myself as a seasonal worker, so I pick up apples, strawberries, cherries, blueberries, pears, but also cucumbers and salads to some extent. Yes, and my field work is also specific, because this is the Grudziądz Powiat. This is the one of the district. Next slide, please, because this is the explanation where I am during my field work. This is really close to the Warsaw, because the Warsaw is the next region described by that. So this is the central Poland, and Grudziądz is called by locals, but also in some literature, as a Europe's orchards basin. So this is, huge concentration of apples production mostly, but not only apples, strawberries, and other fruits, what I mentioned. And also, really surprisingly, because Grudziądz district became at the few months after the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, the most attracting region for Ukrainians under temporary protection. So you can see this is the concentration of temporary Ukrainians with TPD in Poland. So that's why I also try to continue and explain why they decide choose this region. Maybe during the discussion I can explain why should that happen. Next slide, please. Yes, and some maybe not preliminary, but some general outcomes from my research and description, different shades of illegality in agriculture. So I decided to divide into different domain or angle, like related to residents in Poland. And what Justyna said, it was really helpful for me because she explained, different possibilities and legal path, for example, when some Ukrainian workers can join the Poland. But according to my research and what I observe, because this is mostly, some topics emerge from my qualitative research. For example, illegality became the issue, like, for example, someone loss of validity of residence permit. So this is the typically, situation, but also what Justyna said, and I will refer probably for your presentation, Justyna. So this is also, the exceeding the stay under the visa-free regime, because this is mostly to 90 days within the 6 months. But for example, some workers, exceed this period, and there's huge problems for them, to come back to Poland after next season or next part of the season, yes, because it can cover a few times. But also after the COVID-19, we observe, and I also talk with some experts, because I include also the experts' perspective, withdrawal of the COVID special provision in July 2023 has caused many migrants to fall into we call irregularity trap. So, for example, people who can be during the COVID-19 pandemic, free stay in Poland without any restriction. After July, the law has changed, and that's why a lot of people became trapped into this irregularity. Next slide, please. What is important for me, the shades of illegality in terms of related to employment contract, yes, because there is a lot of angles, a lot of cases. So I decide, to choose on most obvious and most visible for me during my research. First of all, employment without a written contract is the most popular strategy of employers, but also the workers who agree for that situation. So I mean, regardless of the type of contract, Justyna said about the harvesting contract, there is also, a typical employment contract according to the labor code in Poland, but also in Poland, we are the leading country using of the civil law contract, like, for example, contract for specific work, but also contract for mandate. It's the most popular among the seasonal workers. So that's why even regardless of these types which can be used by employers, still some employers decide, to use oral contracts, and that's all for seasonal workers. There's also issue of using, I call this using the wrong type of contracts. For example, contract of mandate, which is mostly dedicated for researcher, for artists, for someone who prepares some specific work, and which can be material work outcomes of that. And for example, some employers, they use the contract of mandate or specific works to pick strawberries, which extremely exploitative and flexible type of contracts without any social security coverage. So that's why, for example, some employers, if they decide, to sign any contracts, they decide, to use the wrong type of contracts. Also, there is the huge problems that Justyna also refer for that. For example, signing a contract, even the proper contracts, but without, to declaring to the proper institutions, like, for example, local employment services. So it's also tricky because my interlocutors, they often mention that, for example, they don't have time, to go to local offices and, to issue that document. So that's why, for example, even if some inspectorate can visit particular farm site and ask particular employers, do you have written contracts? Yes, I have, but without, any legal force, yes. And also what is important, failure to declare the employee to an insurance scheme. So this is also related to the oral contracts without any, basis for the social security scheme, regardless of the social security or what Justyna said is the farmer found, which harvesting contracts are covered by that. Next slide, please. Another domain related to labor relations, generally speaking, and I found, unfortunately, really negative aspects. So this is the child labor of underage workers. So I remember to work a few years ago on the blueberry farm site with 12 and 13 years of children who try to help her mother to pick more blueberries, because this is the piece rate work scheme. So that's why if you pick up given amount of blueberries, you can be paid for that amount of fruits, for example, which are picked. So that's why it was also horrible. And unfortunately, employers agree for that, non-compliance measures, unfortunately, because mostly due to the labor shortages, they need workers, even the child workers. So that's why. And these workers, you can ask me about the legal basis. So what Justyna said, this is the visa-free regime. And this is, the invisible scale of people who can, cross the borders on that without any declaration or any, basis in terms of documents. So they only use the biometric passports. And that's why, for example, the children, when I ask them, what are you doing in Blueberries Farm? They explain we are on tourism holidays. So because this is the explanation, for example, for the staff guard border, why you decide to go visit the Poland. This is, tourism aim. Borrowing of workers, I don't know how to say in English, but this is, something like you have your workers, and for example, your colleagues, your neighbors, your member of families needs, for example, immediately workers to pick up, strawberries, for example, and on your farm sites, there is some short break, for example, so you can borrow the workers without any written contracts, or for example, without reporting it to the local labor offices. So it's illegal according to the Polish law. Every employers who use this strategy should, issue that he or she borrow workers to other employers. And next slide, please. And some I call practices at the intersection of illegal employment, worker exploitations, but also non-compliance measures, past and present. Because I observe, I had huge long history to describing different practices which can be observed on the farm side. So for example, first of all, this is, we can call the modern slavery, so keeping employees' passports or other documentation. So employers use the argumentations that this is, for the sake of the documents. And also, to be honest, as explained me, this is, strategy for to keeping the workers on the farm side, because the rotations and the retentions is too much for them. So that's why employers decide, to keep employers' passports. So it's totally illegal. Fortunately, right now it's not in usage, but I heard a lot about that situation when workers mentioned that they take that employers take passports from employees. Not paying the agreed wages, this is the normal, for example, because when you have oral contracts, so that's why there is huge flexibility for employers, for example. Yes, when you agreed, for example, paying for one basket of strawberries 2 Polish zloty, so it's approximately below the €1. But for example, when the weather has changing or where other extra conditions has changed immediately, for example, so employers can, okay, we agreed for that, but unfortunately I should pay that amount of money. So that's why. So the agency and the negotiation power of the seasonal workers is extremely low in that cases when they don't have written contracts. And educating or deductions from accommodation costs, according to the harvesting contracts, the accommodation should be free of charge. But unfortunately, sometimes employers, they decide, to exclude from the salary some money for accommodations, yes, especially for the water usage, gas, electricity, or something like that. Unclearing dealings with intermediaries. So because this is unclear, and to be honest, I still struggle how treat these informal middlemen or brokers, because either employer or workers should pay for that services. But generally speaking, according to ILO law, according also Polish law, employment services, especially, to facilitating the job, should be without any free of charge. It should be, free for workers, but still, for example, they should pay it. And also employers also should pay for that. This amount, it's not maybe too high, but it's approximately €50 per workers. But still, this is quite non-compliance practices used by these informal middlemen. Overtime days off, especially during the peak season, especially when workers pick up soft fruits, but also failure to comply with the health and safety regulations. So this is, the most unfortunately common practices. Next slide, please. Yes, and I would like to, at the end, explain why does still the phenomenon of illegality and other aspects which I mentioned about these worker exploitations and some non-compliance measures in terms of employing the foreigners in agriculture still remain high. And I divided this explanation in 4 perspectives. Next slide, please, Marco. Thank you. So this is the workers' perspective argumentations. So first of all, Ukrainian workers, they decide, to be illegally or irregular terms employed, mostly due to the temporary nature of their migration. So this is the, they are aware that they plan, it's not to settle in Poland, so they decide, to shuttle between countries, even if for extreme short period, like for example, for 2 weeks, because mostly they have some family or caring responsibilities in Ukraine, but also they should take care of one's own farm, because to be honest, the vast majority, according to my knowledge, vast majority of people from in seasonal agriculture workers, this is the smallholders and farmers. So because this is the inhabitants from the rural area, so that's why for them it's normal to shuttle between countries. So the same situation was observed a few years ago in Poland and Germany. So also some small holders and farmers or rural people decide to go to pick up asparagus or other fruits in Germany, for example. Also, what is important, this is my interlocutors, so the Ukrainian workers, they mentioned that this is the lack of attachment to given employer. So that's why for them this is the sense of freedom without written contracts. So for example, if employers can exploit or use some malpractices for them, so they can change employers and go to other better employers, for example, even if some close neighborhoods. Desire to maximize earnings, so it's typically normal for other, like in other sectors or in other terms, in other case of migrant workers. So they try to exploit yourself, to earn a lot of money. And of course, this is also sad, but this is still lack of knowledge about the institutional labor system, which can be support for them, and also the low awareness of the workers' rights. So it's unfortunately a horrible situation. Next slide, please, because I'm. Employers' perspective, why employers decide, to use the oral contracts to not reporting these written contracts to other offices. For example, this is, the labor cost explanation mostly, but also what I was really surprised, some employers, some farmers explain me that this is, the cost minimization strategy in terms of savings on monthly water and waste disposal charges, for example. Because if you employ some workers, you should report that situation, for example, and they try to hide this perspective. So that's why, for example, this is also explanation, not only cheap labor costs, but also savings on usage of that water and waste disposal. Lack of time, what I said also, this is, a huge problem for them. And, this is maybe, how to say, comfortable explanation why they decide, because we can also explain that we don't have time for, do this on that. But employers, explain that, for example, during the harvesting peak season, they don't have, time going to city and, for example, to declare some documents. So that's why there is huge still, gray market and informal jobs. We can also call with my colleagues, this is the slow process of professionalization of the farmers, and also they still learn the role of employers. Yes, because this is, typically my interlocutors a few years ago, it was typical peasants in rural areas. So that's why this is really new role for them to be, professional manager, professional employers who should, do a lot of administration stuffs, a lot of works related to, employing legally workers. So that's why this is one of the explanation. What is also important, the belief that the act is not very harmful. So this is, the explanation, because they believe and they know that there is no, sanctions for that. So no extra payment for that situation. So they believe and they use that strategy, using of irregular or even illegal aspects. Next slide, please. Yes, and the state authorities, because I also great opportunity to talk with some experts, some politicians, policymakers, and also look at some archival documentation. So what is the perspective of the state authorities? I called, this is mostly, you know, the politicians, policymakers, mostly the people from the Ministry of Family, Social Policy, Labor and Social Policy. So first of all, strategic importance of agriculture sector and the food security. So agriculture exceptionalism is, you know, in huge usage in Poland and Polish policymakers, especially right now during the COVID, and what Fabiola said, the key essential workers. So this is, you know, the same. So that's why we can agree, for example, to exploit to some extent workers. But the most important for us is the food security for society in Poland. Lack of mechanism of control to control individual farmers, because National Labor Inspectorate, they don't have rights, you know, to visit individual farm sites. So that's why this is, you know, excluded from the system. So the only one who can visit farm sites, it's researcher like me, but also to some extent border guard who can you know, visit and ask only for illegally stay migrants without any, you know, looking at the working or employment conditions. So it's, yeah, poorly researched area and lack of reliable data on the scale of abuse and irregularity. So this is, you know, there is no evidence-based policy in agriculture. So that's why, because they can explain, we don't have any data showing the scale of that that problems, but also there is huge problem with lengthy legalization procedure. So that's why people and some employers decide for that. But state authorities, they describe that they don't have enough resources, you know, for administration staff. So that's why the procedures are lasting too long. And that's why, for example, some foreigners, while they wait for the documentation, they, for example, decide take employment in agriculture. And next slide, please. And maybe this is the last point, non-state actor perspective. So this is the lack of trade unions. This is huge, horrible situation, because there is no one trade unions or labor movement which are devoted to this kind of workers. Yes, this is horrible situation. Even migrant organization, I'm in touch with a lot of organization in Warsaw, but they explain, "Kami, sir, we don't have resources because we have too much work to do in Warsaw, in other cities. We know from your research that there is huge problems and some, you know, exploitative situation, but we don't have people and resources to go to really close area, because the Grudziądz is 50 kilometers from Warsaw. But still, this is huge problems. There are no any supporting organization. The only one is the Caritas. So this is the faith-based organization in Poland, but they don't look at these workers. Yes, so it's unfortunately the situation, and to be honest, even low level of media and public interest. So even the people, generally speaking, public audience in Poland, there is low awareness. Maybe there was some example showing that we need essential workers only during the first year of pandemic. Right now, there is no interest. The only interest is who will pick strawberries for the season. And next slide, please. This will be the one. Sorry for that. Yes, instead of summary, some questions for the future. Yes, because right now we are really situation where the workers, and especially new migration package law, is under review. So my question is, to what extent will the new migration law plan for the spring of that year improve the situation of seasonal workers? To be honest, I don't know. Will Ukrainian workers continue to take up employment in the agriculture sector in unregulated manner? What efforts do employers have to make to recruit and retain a sufficient number of workers for the season? And will the arrival of new nationality, what also Justyna referred, among seasonal workers worsen the current employment and accommodation conditions? Because I can imagine, observe that conditions in few years, that, for example, when Nepalese workers, Filipinos can appear in agriculture, their situation will be even worse than Ukrainians, because Ukrainians, they build some powers, some agencies, because the language is really similar to Poland. But I can imagine that, for example, the typical workers from third countries can be treated even worse than Ukrainians and other workers. The last slide, this is, you know, the final slide. Thank you so much if you are interested. So this is, you know, some pieces of my work. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Camilla. You can stay in case there are questions. In fact, we'll also have a chair for Justina if you join back the panel. There you go. So I will open the floor for questions, both from the room and online. If the people online want to ask a question, please raise your hand, or you can. Oh, there we go. Or you can also write them in the chat. So let me see what. So Kate has a long question. I will read it in a moment. But first, let's start with Fabiola. It's a bit faster. So for Camille. Is there any role for global unions in terms of raising awareness? And then because of the absence of local trade unions, and for Justina, the ways in which third country nationals from Colombia, Nepal, and are brought into the country. Are there bilateral labor migration agreements specific to those countries, or through a general, let's say, visa route? And then say, if those who want to answer, you can switch on your microphone.
Okay, thank you so much, Fabiola, for that question. I wish that some global unions can appear in Poland, and especially, they try to grasp the issue of seasonal migrant workers' rights, conditions, etc. But right now, I didn't see any possibilities. Our local trade unions, yes, because in Poland we have some trade organization, but they exclude this topic from their agenda. So I wish that maybe some global organization try to, invest time and invest some resources, to pay attention for that issue.
Thank you for the question. I think actually that maybe Camille will have a better understanding of how specifically people from Colombia and Nepal enter Poland. There's been in general, and I wouldn't like to start with that, but it's been quite a politically charged issue in Poland in recent years, or in 2023, correct me if I'm wrong, the cash for visa scandal, whereby people from India, for example, could purchase the visa to enter Poland, and from very remote countries, so not only India, but also on the other side of the globe, to purchase this visa to enter later on, to gain the access to Schengen area. So this is only to let you know that basically our there are various channels. This is not, I'm not saying this is the channel for the temporary labor migrant workers in agriculture, not at all, but they have been aware of work opportunities in Poland as well. Are you aware of any bilateral agreements between Colombia and Nepal in that regard?
No.
No, not really. Yeah.
To be honest, Polish government, they decide, to not sign any bilateral contracts with sending countries. So I know that there was some efforts from Filipino governments to lobby for the Ministry of Family, Social Labor and Social Policy a few years ago, but still Polish government, they excluded that division from the migration policy. So right now we only have, the only bilateral agreement is related with the social security coordination. That's all. But this is not related with the labor migration flows and regulations, how people can be recruited to Poland.
Thanks. So from Kate, the first question was also about bilateral agreements. So you mostly covered that already. But there is a follow-up about the presence of these workers from new, let's say, migration countries to Poland. Does it also happen in other sectors, would be the question. Is it a specificity of agriculture, or are you seeing this also across other sectors of the economy, if you have those data?
Maybe just one explanation in terms of bilateral, because I remember maybe there will be new path or maybe new opening in migration policy, because last week we won the research project with cooperation with the IOM Poland to establish the basic for the evidence for new migration policy based on the bilateral agreement. So that's why we are preparing the project. So maybe in the future that situation will appear, but right now without any bilateral contracts. But in terms of other sectors, could you explain more? Because you mean, Marco, that there is some similarities, or?
Yes, that's about, is this a specificity for agriculture, the new presence of those migrants from, let's say, Nepal or Colombia or India, or is it also visible across the rest of the economy?
To be honest, yes, in all sectors we can observe some people, migrants from South America, but also from Asia countries. So this is, normal to join to other jobs. To be honest, I didn't find any Nepalese or Filipino workers in agriculture during my jobs in Grudziądz district. Mostly, as I know, there are some places in Poland they are in greenhouses mostly because this is much more organized work and long lasting. So I mean, this is not typical seasonal work because they can be employed even right now in greenhouses. But mostly, as I know, this kind of third country nationals from Colombia, Mexico, India, they are employed mostly by the temporary work agencies, and these work agencies can, send them to different sectors. So that's why, for example, even to some extent, I can imagine that some farmers can use that services and ask, for example, I need workers, and for example, some Nepalese workers can appear on farm site. Maybe.
Just to complement the information that the situation, it's been growing equally as Kamala exactly explained. One reason that you can also see when it's happening and when it picks up in terms of this diversification was the invasion of Ukraine by Russia when Poland experienced a huge inflow of around 1 million Ukrainians. However, those were mostly women and children. At the same time, a lot of men left Poland to go back to Ukraine. So there are, as far as I understand, no reliable data to actually understand how many people left. But the people from Ukraine who came were not a perfect substitute in economic terms to those who had already left. And lots of them, there was agriculture, construction, but also manufacturing. So that leaves, that was the moment when this diversification picked up as well.
Okay, and then to pick up the last couple of questions, Kate also asked about healthcare. Can they access healthcare? How do they access healthcare if they need to? And there is another question for Camille about the impossibility of accessing farms, which have, of course, struck some of the public as particularly problematic. The impossibility for labor inspections to access farm. Is that on legal grounds? Is that on practical, like lack of inspectors and difficulty of accessing a remote, let's say, workforce, and are there ways around it, or is it legally impossible for a labor inspection to happen on the farm grounds?
Thank you so much for that questions. In terms of healthcare and access, if you are irregular migrants without any legal base, for example, to cover your health insurance, so that's why you can only pay from your own money, for example, for that services. And I also ask my interlocutors, and also I talk with the local doctors about that practices, and he explained me this is the perspective of the doctors, the general practitioners. I have a lot of contacts with farmers, and they ask me, for example, immediately in some emerging cases, for example, my workers, has some injuries. Could you help me? So this is, this is legal still, but these kind of doctors, they don't ask about, a lot of passports, documentations, or that issue, for example. So farmers, as an employer, pay for that visiting, for that services, and this is the only situation. As I know, this is the typical, and none of my interlocutors mentioned that visit public official hospitals or other services offered by the health insurance. Only if you pay by own in some emergency cases. So that's why this is the case in terms of usage of the healthcare. So this is huge problems because I know that Ukrainian workers, and this is crazy because they bring to Poland some special medicaments. I don't know what is the ingredients, but this illegal in Poland, they explain me. So this is, for example, for the back pain after the strawberry picking, exploitating time. So that's why they use different, pills, some injuries without, some illegal ingredients. I don't know what is exactly, but they explain, I saw that they use of that kind of, treatments for them. So that's why, for example, this is the strategy. So that's why they bring some medicaments, some pills for possible pains. But in terms of huge emergency cases, they use, the private services. So this is the private is they should pay. But fortunately, sometimes employer decide, to cover that that payment. Yeah, in terms of labor inspectorate, I talked with the head of National Labor Inspectorate even in November last year, and he was really surprised that there is such a lot of different problems and issues which I covered and I discovered during my research. He was really surprised. Me too, because I suppose that, for example, someone like the head of National Labor Inspectorate should have knowledge about that. Not, but to be honest, there is huge problem like in others administration, like there is lack of staff at National Labor Inspectorate. So this is the one explanation, but also according to the law, and this is the legal, if you are individual solo entrepreneur farmer without establish your business and registered everywhere. That's why, for example, National Labor Inspectorate, they don't have right to visit your farm site. Only if you pay the taxes. I mean, the taxes, I'm not a specialist in that area, but as I know, some interlocutors mentioned, and on my family farm site, which I conduct my participant observation, they mentioned that this is for them, this is the case, for example. So this is the, false family farm which can employ workers but without any restrictions to be visiting and controlled by National Labor Inspectorate. So this is the legal situation.
Thank you. So there is one last question and then we will go for a coffee break. So the last question is from Frederic, who says that he confirms the feeling that no statistics, no problems. So we just don't know, so we don't care. And what do you think should be done to have a better actual picture of the reality? How should we improve our collection of statistics to have a better view of the sector? And I will join this question just to say that it is very striking, of course, not surprising, but the distance between the discourse on migration security and how much we want to control our border and how little we actually know of people coming in the country. And it shows really the alliance between the security discourse and the need for workforce in those sectors. But anyway, how do we improve the situation for data collection?
Thank you for the question, Frederick. And well, that's a 1 million question, I'd say. I don't want to sound, but I can tell you only from my perspective of a person who was trying to understand this situation and going from one data source to another, the centralization of the data, which in the first instance would be very helpful. Another thing specifically about different data sources provide the information using different definitions, different timescales. That is really very important. It makes life difficult if you want to understand the situation. The second thing I would mention is that for now, this is very impressive database from the Ministry of Labor, which shows you the number of documents issued, or clearly the information on who actually, or some sort of a requirement on saying or stating or registering the person who actually picked up the job and for how long. But we heard during Camille's presentation how difficult it might be to implement in practice, considering how busy the employers are during harvest time, and that is not on top of their priority. However, from the purely statistical point of view, that would possibly greatly facilitate the situation.
Yeah, totally agree. But in terms of the security, you, Marco, said migrant security. I wish, to see that someone in Poland, some policymakers, they treat the migrant security, because right now we have securitization of migration. So this is quite different. But to be honest, I think that the seasonal migration, especially due to the severe labor shortages, this is the one of type of migration which are excluded from these negative narratives or hostile environment towards the migrant, generally speaking. So that's why I think there is some assumption that people agree that we need that kind of essential key workers. So that's why we shouldn't, how to say, exclude from them, or, to to talk in negative way about seasonal migrant workers. Yes, because we need them. There is no any Polish people, you know, who try to join that jobs. So that's why in public debate, in even political narrative, I didn't observe that the seasonal workers are, you know, treat as a negative aspects in terms of securitization of migration. So this is the only one example when we look at different, you know, specific sectors. So that's why agriculture has, you know, special treatment, mostly due to what we called with our colleagues agriculture exceptionalism. So this is, you know, one of the best explanations or justification why these kind of jobs, which kind of migrant regimes are, you know, absent from that hostile discourse about migration.
All right. Thank you again, Justina and Camille, for the presentation and for engaging with very interesting questions. Now we will go for a very short coffee break. So for those at home, don't go anywhere. We will be back in 10 minutes with the next part of the seminar. All right, welcome back after this very short coffee break, with apologies to all those who are in person and had to rush through the coffee and croissant. To start our second part, we will have a presentation from Audrey Deverson, who is a PhD researcher at European Birds of Passage. And let me just share her presentation, and then I will give you the floor. There we go. Presentation is on. So Audrey writes a PhD thesis on women temporary labor migrants in Spain and in France. And today she's focusing on the seasonal scheme in agriculture in Spain. So Audrey, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. So today I want to share some thoughts on one phenomenon that is happening in Spain regarding seasonal migrants who are coming from transnational migration to internal migration, and we will see the legal impact on it. So to contextualize a bit, seasonal migration is really the migration from third country to Spain, to the EU, to one of the EU member states. So I'm mainly focused on that. And in Spain is mainly prevalent in agriculture, and in particular in the south of Spain, in Huelva, where is a lot of strawberry fields once more, and where is only Moroccan women. So as we say during the pause, really gendered. We will see through the slides that migration law really have a territorial limits, and they should only work in Huelva. But in practice, they also work in other provinces in the north, so in Segovia, to do the same work. So this practice calling to question the understanding of the labor market and the risk of new vulnerability for this woman. Seasonal migration to Spain is a circular migration program that exists since the beginning of the 2000s, and which is now regulated by the organic law and a royal decree. And it can be an individual or a collective recruitment, but mainly it is collective recruitment, and that's why I will only focus on that now. And this collective recruitment is also regulated each year by a ministerial order. So now we have the new one for 2025. And this type of recruitment is based on bilateral agreement on labor migration, because it is mentioned in the law that the seasonal offer are first target third country national from country with which Spain has signed some bilateral agreements. And so I just put some data. So the last data we have at the Spanish level shows that last year 20,000 people came to Spain through this scheme. And most of them are women, because most of them are in Huelva. So Huelva is a red point really at the south, next to the Mediterranean. And I also mentioned Segovia because it's the movement we will see. And Segovia is a point in the center of Spain. Okay, So the legal perspective. Circular migration to Spain is driven by labor market needs. So you only can recruit third country national if there is no people residing in Spain that can fill these jobs. And so you have in the migration law and royal decree how to do the labor market test in a way. And it is mentioned that you need to focus on the national employment situation. However, the data are dependent on the autonomous community. So it's really various labor market tests if you are going to various autonomous community. So this is important because we will see that when they are recruited, they obtain an authorization. This authorization is for 4 years, and it's only for seasonal activity. But even though it's for 4 years, they only reside and work for 9 months a year maximum. And this authorization is bound to one employer. Here it's interesting to see that temporary employment agency cannot be one of the employers, so there is some protection for that. And that this authorization is also limited to one geographic area of the autonomous community. So they are really bound to this territory. They cannot move freely within Spain to change employer or to work in different province. They shouldn't, at least. And also this territorial commitment is reinforced by the return commitment they have, because at the end of each season activity, they must return to Morocco without being able to move in Spain before that. So from this data, we can say that the seasonal labor market is composed by employer and territorial limits. In the territorial limit is the autonomous community, as the data for the labor market test are based on autonomous community data, and that their authorization is also bound to this autonomous community. So in a way, for seasonal migrants, the labor market is composed of territorial limits and employer, but with really more important focus on the territory. So we see they shouldn't be moving within Spain, but in practice, they do. So this is the next slide. So in practice, seasonal workers who are recruited to work in Huelva also work in Segovia. This was confirmed by some trade unionists and NGOs and researchers in Spain. And the similarities between both territories is that both work with the strawberry fields, and when they recruit directly through the seasonal migration scheme, they only recruit Moroccan women. So how can we do this internal migration if seasonal migrants themselves cannot move and are really bound to one territory? And so the law allows, in a way, this internal mobility through two processes, so the interlinked process and the change of geographic area. So the next one. So the interlinked process is the business association of employers in Spain can apply for seasonal, to ask for seasonal migration for a link management of various periods of work or activities in Spain, but this period of work must be successively and uninterrupted. So it's really the idea that you recruit one seasonal worker to work in Huelva, and then you move him or her, but mainly her, to another place, but directly after this period of work. You cannot let them be in Spain without working, because as it is written, it is an attempt to make the most of the stay of certain workers. So this permits this change of geographic area since the beginning. And I just want to highlight that if they ask to send the workers in different autonomous communities, they must demonstrate that the labor market needs them in all the autonomous community. The other possibility is a change of geographic area. So in this case, it would be that you recruit a worker for Huelva, but only for Huelva. But once they are in Huelva, you can make a change. Like the employer can ask for a change. So I want to highlight that in the law, that like in the royal decree and in the ministerial order, it is only provided for the change of employer. And if the new employer is in another geographic area, therefore they can move through Spain. It is really written that change of employer only requested by the new employer, geographic area only if there is a new employer. However, the next one, please. In the annex of the ministerial order, since the order for 2021, it is not written change of employer and geographic area, but the formulary say change of employer and or geographic area. So in a way, the formulary allows the same employer to decide to move their worker freely, even though it is not really in the content of the law. Maybe it's just an error, I don't know. But what is interesting is just the time, because this change was for the 2021, and we see that there has been a shift in the need of seasonal migration, because if we just look at the data of Segovia, which is the host province for this movement that I talk about, we see that before 2022, they never needed any seasonal migrants. They never recruited any seasonal migrant. But since this moment, yes. So maybe after COVID, there has been a change in the seasonal labor markets. So from this new data, from the side of employers, we see that with this interlinked process and with the possibility of change of employer or change of geographic area and or, let's say, we see that they can, they allow workers to move within Spain in various autonomous communities, always if there is labor market needs. But this movement is therefore requested by the employer. So if labor market is still understood as territory and employer needs, we see that, okay, for seasonal migrants, what is important is a territorial limit, but for employers, it's their needs. So they can really outlaw, in a way, outweight the territorial boundaries of labor market for their own needs, even though the authorization of the seasonal migrant is really bound to one place. The next one, please. So now, what is really the impact on this internal mobility for seasonal workers themselves? So first, I just want to highlight that when we are talking about vulnerability, we shouldn't only talk about vulnerability from our perspective, but also from the perspective of the workers. And a lot of paper on seasonal migrants in Huelva really highlights that these women migrate for economic needs, that they want to, they need to migrate in order to help their family in their, or their children mainly in Morocco. And so they really want to make the most of their stay in Spain in order to have more economic benefits. So in a way, we could understand that this possibility for them to move within Spain is an opportunity for them to work more and therefore to have more more wages or more economic benefits, and therefore it helps them in their country of origin. So it could be an opportunity for them, just to say that. However, we cannot we need also to highlight that they have no self-agency. This movement is not driven by their own needs, but it's driven by the needs of the employer. So they need to follow what the employer asks. They cannot just decide to change employer, to change geographic area, to work in various places. So it's not really an opportunity for them to empower themselves in a way. Also, I want to say that in the case of the change of employer, of change of geographic area that the employer can request, worker must consent to this change. Of course, as we are in a situation pretty particular that their authorization to stay in Spain is bound to them, plus the fact that they need a contract to come to Spain, is it really free consent? I don't know, I guess not. But okay, this is one risk of vulnerability in this sense. But the other risk of vulnerability is the difference of protection in labor law. In Spain, you have national labor laws that applies to all the territory, normal, but then you also have collective agreement. The collective agreement can be at the national level, but it also can be if there is none at the national level, you can do independent on some territory and some sectors. And also, I must say that you can also have some collective agreement at the business level. And in this case, the business level is a priority than the one on the sector or territory. But in this case, there is none, and no collective agreement at the business level. So we need to look at the collective agreement at the province level for agriculture. And so we have two different collective agreements in Huelva and in Segovia. The next one. And they are really different in their content. So what we can say is that in Segovia, the collective agreement is not targeting at all seasonal migrants. It's really for agricultural worker in general. And that's why we see that the salary is a minimum salary for Spain, like the basic one, but they don't mention that there is a minimum salary particular for seasonal worker. So we need to go to national law to see that there is one that is higher than the normal one for normal worker, let's say. But still, the minimum salary for seasonal workers is lower than the one provided by the collective agreement of Huelva. So to move from Huelva to Segovia means that you will earn less money working in agriculture. Also, there is some differences in the labor condition, even though the working hour per week is mainly the same, that you also need to work 6 days a week. In Huelva, you also have intensive day with less daily break, and you have less day off a week. So your conditions are better in Segovia than in Huelva. And the other difference that for me is pretty important is that, as I said, in Segovia, there is no migration perspective at all. There is no mention that most of the workers are seasonal migrants. They just say that if there is a need for housing, you must provide it, but there is no specific provision for seasonal worker. While in the case of Huelva, the housing part really mentions that if it's seasonal migrants, they need to comply with some condition. They also mention, and the other difference is the gender perspective, that in the collective agreement in Huelva, they mention the need for an intercultural mediator who has gender perspective. So they really see that you have different cultures, that you are different gender necessity, etc. They also, the collective agreement also provides to facilitate the access of trade unions in the farm in order to inform the seasonal migrants on their rights. And due to some difficulties that already existed in Huelva, there is also a protocol for the prevention and action in case of sexual and gender-based harassment for seasonal migrants, because in 2018 there has been some issues about it. Let's say that. So to conclude, we see that internal mobility of seasonal migrants is really employer-driven, and it is it also shows the different understanding of labor market depending on employers or workers. And we see therefore that there is an increasing power and influence of employer in the labor market, while it may outweigh the importance of territorial boundaries. And I just want to say that due to the difference of labor protection between both provinces, what is key is the information to seasonal migrants about their rights, because even though it is possible to have different type of protection, but you need to be informed about it, because if you're not, there is an increasing risk of abuse from the employer. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Audrey. So for this section, we will straight open the floor for questions before we move to the Nordics. So if you have any questions, always the same game. You can put them in the comments. You can raise your hand, and of course, if there are questions from the room, you will just have to. Of course, those at home don't see the layout of the room, but if there is a question from the room, you have to come to the table of the examined person. Anyway, so I've seen there is a comment. In the meantime, Andrea, do you want to ask a question? In the meantime, you can come closer, and I will also check the chat. So this is about enforcement and how would legal avenues in case of legal dispute over working condition work. This, of course, in the context of your own research, but it could have been asked also for other situations. Anyway, if there is a problem with their employment condition, how does it work legally? What pathways of recourse do they have?
Well, I need to think about it a little bit more, but what I just can say is that mainly what the worker do is going through to talk with some NGOs that are directly in Huelva, and this one goes to speak directly with the employer. So it's in a way an informal way of trying to improve their situation. You also have now an increasing interest from trade unionists that tends to make some agreement with NGOs in order to know what are the real problem of the worker in the field, because the workers don't go by themselves to trade unionists. So this is what I can say on that.
Thank you. Andrea, you have to switch on the mic.
Like this. Okay, thank you. No, I mean, this was really fascinating. And my question, it's a bit of probably about the background of what you presented. So, because I think that what you told us about the fact that there are different collective agreements in different regions brings the issue of labor market segmentation to like a next level almost. So not almost, actually to a next level. It's very fragmented even internally. So I was wondering, what's the rationale of having different collective agreements in different regions, and how do the unions relate to that? And is it only for the agricultural sector, or does it apply this logic also to other sectors? Thank you.
Okay, so the objective of the trade unions is really to have a collective agreement at the national level. But in agriculture, they are not able to do it. They tried lots of time, and it was not possible. So that's why they decide to do it at the local level. Also in Spain, it's not a federal state, but mainly like really they all have, it's in fact also another problem for the inspection. Because the labor inspection are also locally competent. So it's really complicated because trade unions are only competent in their province. So the one in Huelva is not competent for what is happening in Segovia. The labor inspectorate, neither. They are only competent in the province. So it's really hard for them because they know that there are some movement, but they cannot really work on it in a way. So it's the problem. And the different collective agreement at the sectoral level, in the provincial level, it can be in all type of sectors, but it's really in the case of agriculture, as we know, trade unionists are not really strong in this field, and they are not able to agree with employer to do a collective agreement at national level.
So I think we have somebody wants to to ask a question or a comment and take the floor. Let's see if I can. You can switch on your sound and camera.
Hello, my name is Mireia Llovera. I'm a Spanish researcher from the University of Valencia. I focus on temporary migration and also on posting. And it has been a great presentation. I'm fully at the disposal of the speaker if she would like to cooperate with me. And I just wanted to highlight another discrimination issue that concerns the Moroccan labor workforce, the female workforce that comes to my country, which is that there is a requisite that is sometimes it has been even on written basis, but now it's on unwritten basis that they have to be married, in the sense that there is a discrimination on a civil status basis, because like that they make sure that they will come back home because there is a family waiting for them. Also about trade unions, although they formally they may have the capability to act throughout the whole state. It is true that normally they focus more on the Spanish workforce issues rather than immigrants issues. And I completely agree that there actually NGOs are taking the place of trade unions there. Although we're trying to gather forces to give them a bit of support, but it's completely true that it's not really working very well.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the additional information, and also, of course, for your availability for Audrey. Any other questions from the public or online? Okay. Fabiola, how do they enforce the fact that the employment relationship stays with the employer and not with other, let's say, intermediaries or contractors? And is it enforced at all?
Well, I just know that when I asked all the NGOs, trade unionists, lawyers in Huelva, they all told me, no, there is absolutely no temporal agency here. But is it true or not? It's hard really to say. Because at the same time, some of them say, oh, yes, it's true that there is some Valencian employment agency, but it's not really for seasonal workers. So I'm not sure they can really enforce it. So yeah.
Okay. Any other questions, curiosities about Audrey's presentation? Otherwise, we will move to the next part of our conference. Thank you. Another question. Okay, in case of dismissal, can they change employer?
No, they cannot, because they are obliged in this way to come back to Morocco. They have really no agency in Spain. They are in Spain because an employer wants them. That's all. It's like they are still really attached to Morocco for everything, except for the employer. But they have no agency, except in one case, it's true. It's in the case of abuse. So I put it in one of my slides. There is a possibility to change employer. Normally it's after 3 months, but if there is an abuse from the employer, they can change employer directly. And in this case, it is allowed for them to stay in Spain. I think it's for 3 months maximum, but you need to have another employer that wants you to hire you. So they cannot really go to an employer and say, oh, please hire me. It's just that they need to say to the institution, oh, there is a case of abuse. It has to be sure that there is this abuse. And so they put them in wait in a way, and the institution ask for employers if they want to hire them. It's the same with the force majeure. So if one employer has a problem and he cannot really fulfill his part on the contract, so to give them work, in this case, the institution will try to find another employer.
There we go. Any other last-minute questions for Audrey? And of course, for all of you, and also for the previous presentations, if you have burning questions, we are all happy to answer them by email. Feel free to get in touch with the researchers in question. Okay, thank you again, Audrey. And then we will move on to the Nordic part of the morning. We'll start with Minna, I suppose. So I will find your presentation. You can join us here at the table. I'd say a bit of a mess with fonts. Yeah. It's okay. Everything, at least it's everything is on the screen. So for our next presentation, we have Minna Sekula from the University of Tampere in Finland. So Minna, you have the floor, 20 minutes as everybody else.
Thank you, Marco. Perfect. Yeah, if you can be my time person, because I realized I left mine there. Thank you. Yes. So what the work I'm presenting, it's partly published work, partly work in progress that I've postdoctoral research I've done in the context of EU Horizon project Aspire, and where I'm looking at political decision making related to the very particular case of, well, agricultural work resembling work actually in the forestry sector, where seasonal migrant workers from Thailand have been coming to Finland now over 20 years. And this concerns or has concerned annually mainly like between 2,000, 4,000 persons coming from Thailand to Finland for 2 to 3 months. So, well, you can, whether it's a lot or not, but it's not like a huge scale. But I think it's an interesting case showing how cheap labor is enabled by the state, and in this like geopolitical and geographical context of a Nordic country where like the number of irregular migrants in Finland is very low, and that's not like just leaving it out there and letting kind of the market to solve it is not such an option, especially in a context where we very much trust the authorities, believe in the rules, how state is also manufacturing this devalued or cheap labor. Next slide, please. So, yeah, apologies for the mess with the yeah. But so just saying briefly that kind of theoretically where I'm coming from are these discussions on differential inclusion along the lines what, for instance, Sandra Mesandra and Brett Nielsen have written in the context of critical border studies. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm looking at this political decision making and administrative practices and how this substandard labor market position has been justified over the years. And I think it kind of really shows how, or like the way I see it, I'm really interested in hearing your feedback, that labor law is really, in the case of those categorized as migrants, labor law is secondary, that it's the aliens law that determines. Also, it can be for the good or bad, in a way, the labor market position ultimately, or so it seems to me. But happy to hear from you. And then I just thought I'll say something about the kind of background to this berry picking. So we are talking about these berries that grow in the Nordic forests. You know, Finland, it's a lot of sparsely populated areas. So if you drive around, you only see forest from the car window, and yeah, there's nothing much else especially in the northeastern part of Finland. And then there is this tradition that Finnish people are very proud of, this right of public access, sometimes called everyone's right, that you can go both to publicly and privately owned forests and pick these berries. they are there like freely for anyone to use, and which these so-called berry companies, berry purchasing companies have kind of, they've created a business model on top of that. So traditionally also there used to be this rural Finland-wide network for purchasing the berries from local people, but especially since the EU membership, it's not been lucrative, like given the prices, what's paid for the berries, it's not been lucrative to sell the berries for the berry industry that then has expanded over the last 20 years, partly because these forest berries have become very fashionable in these global health trends, or because of those, but partly also, I would claim, because of the available very cheap labor, and the kind of the logistical structure has also changed. But then I also wanted to say that when we talk about the berries in Finland, like everything I'm going to say is not like independent from the sociocultural meaning of wild berries. So if you ever flown Finnair, which is the Finnish airline, you get served blueberry juice, and there's the painting. It's one of the like artists who were key persons to create Finnish nationalism in the late 19th century. It's the berry picking pastoral scenario. And this is what we imagine, like it's very pure and nice, and you pick by hand. And you'll see pictures later. How does it actually look when it's picked for the industry? But then there's some of the contemporary pickers demonstrating in Bangkok, and in front of the Finnish and Swedish embassies. They're holding signs naming the contemporary berry companies. But yeah, we can go forward. The phenomenon I'm talking about, it's this short-term circular migration just in time for the berry season. It's always a little bit mystery when the berries ripen, and then you need to be there in the forest to pick them. And the pickers from northeastern Thailand finance their travel themselves. And you can imagine how much berries you need to pick if you need to finance the airfare, among other things, and if you then want to make some money on top of that. So this means that these people from Thailand pick really, really large quantities. They tons of, like thousands of kilos of forest berries, which is like it's kind of unimaginable. And this, you can see it's manually picked. They use this kind of a tool you see in the picture. And then what I'm actually wanting to say in this presentation is this different administrative routes, or how this has been enabled in Finland. So until 2022, the pickers came on Schengen tourist visas. And then after some scandals, some other things happened. But yeah, and maybe just that you get an idea. Also, I've a paper on the intermediaries and their kind of central role. This is not something I'm focusing on here, but just that. So this happens in the forest. They the pickers see very few local people, and then they live in these so-called camps. Sometimes they also sleep in the forest, but these campsites that are managed by staff from Thailand, who have this double role, that they are the recruiters in Thailand, and then they manage the camps, and this obviously has a great impact in what kind of contacts people have, and so forth. But obviously, I'm not saying that then when problems have occurred, we should just say that it's the Thai staff. I think it's very much like we should look at this in the way how this creates incentives to pick these very large quantities of berries that the industry is dependent on, and it's repeated over and over again, how the local people would not be able to pick enough berries for the industry because it's about the scales. So very much what Fabiola was saying in the morning about like analyzing what the labor shortages are actually about. So it's a very like a central question to this as well. But so how this has been enabled that the industry has gotten this relatively very short, cheap berries is that first people came on the Schengen short-term or tourist visas. If I may have this next slide, please. Before the berry companies started to rely on recruitment from Thailand, there was this period in early 1990s, or around the EU membership also, 1994, that people came from like nearby areas, mainly Russia and Estonia, and they were also issued this or they came on short-term visas. But of course, it's also the same berries on the other side of the border in Russia, for instance. You drive your car, you pick the berries. If you don't like the price, you maybe drive back. So a little bit different type of phenomena. Then also, so it was like a debate then that is it the same thing to invite people from a faraway country or not? And then in the new aliens law in 2004, Finland exempted certain seasonal jobs from the requirement to have like a work residence permit. And then garden berries, so strawberries, were exempted. And then when this started, the Finnish companies were following example from Sweden. They wanted to recruit from Thailand. Maybe Andrea will say more about that soon. So this was kind of used that, yeah, because these garden berries are now exempted, maybe we can say that it's okay to pick blueberries or bilberries as well. But then like when you look at the policy documents, it's very contradictory, and it kind of, to me as a sociologist, seems that there is this great determination to create a way that if we explain it this way, maybe we manage like what actually happened there. It's a little bit unclear. But anyway, from the beginning, the instrument to entry for the Thai people who are like over 90% of the industry's raw material was the Schengen tourist visa that you're not supposed to use for working. So it was not employment. So they came as this very gray area. Not employees nor entrepreneurs, maybe tourists, not quite tourists, but berry pickers. Thank you. And then there was some like other exceptions created within this system that, in the Schengen visa requirements, you have the requirement for sufficient funds. So then these tourists were said that you don't need to have the funds, but you will cover with the income you gain. That is not salary, but and then like later, there were like over the years, there's been different explanations, like what is this based on, and I think this is maybe my favorite one, how picking wild berries belongs to the right of public access in Finland, and it is regarded that realizing this right might also entail separate travel from abroad. So we have this kind of universal right in Finland that we want to make sure that anyone can just come. I think it's a very radical position on global mobility in a way. I'm being ironic here, but you get the point, maybe. And then when the seasonal workers directive was implemented in Finland, there was this discussion that should these forest berry pickers be included or not. And it was kind of also this seasonal work permit is not processed by the migration office or the Finnish migration service, but the embassies, and it's kind of very much lighter than everything that goes through the Finnish migration service. And then it was debated that how do we do it? And then it was said that no, seasonal work is quite okay. There's no exploitation, that only the forest berry pickers are exploited. So they are not included in the Seasonal Workers Act. And also that if forest berry picking would become like contractual employment, it should be like labor legislation should be changed, that we can't do it in this kind of aliens law related legislation. So and then like over the years, it's not surprising when people come far away, do this very, very low paid work. There was testimonies and evidence of exploitation, also like one larger police investigation that started in 2016. So Finland created this different both like legislative and before that soft law instruments to kind of improve the situation, but the pickers were never recorded as employees. Yeah, for instance, the berry companies were made to sign together with the government this letter of intent where they promise that they don't overcharge for recruitment. They don't overcharge like not charge, but overcharge the pickers for recruitment. But then it was not like binding, but it was this, everyone has good intent. And this was kind of made to a separate statute, to this so-called Lex Berry, where the to like a law level thing in then 2021, so not so long ago. But then what happened? Next slide, please. In 2022, the Finnish police came out with this like information on large-scale police like investigations, and now there's 3 of the largest berry companies. They are prosecuted on human trafficking, of course, because it can't be labor exploitation because it's not contractual employment, but like the situation seemed so severe. And then there was also this one high-ranking ministry official was he was actually convicted now in the first level of course for bribery, which is very, very exceptional in Finland. So I think this kind of created this panic reaction. Next slide, please. So they temporarily suspended, like after this information came out, it was actually in late 2022, they temporarily suspended the visas. So actually you can see the picture, like, so the Schengen visa application, like if you looked at it, they had even the separate thing that for berry pickers, which is not seasonal work. So they first said that they're not going to issue the visas, and then there was this attempt to amend the Seasonal Workers Act. I've been then told that at the time there was still like lack of political will, that it didn't go through. But after a few months, when they realized that they can't amend the Seasonal Workers Act, and according to my understanding, kind of lobbying from the berry purchasing companies, they resumed it and said that now we do this with extra precision and give out the visas. And I think this is like reflective of how the berry purchasing companies, they are also like economically, it might not be so significant, but the areas they are placed are kind of economically deprived in Finland, that there is not so much like economic activity. And there's been this great belief that there is this huge potential in all the berries that rotten in the forest, that it's an interesting, and it's actually like a similar kind of extractivist fantasy has been present for a long time, that if we would just manage to pick all the berries, how much would we gain? Like, so it has to do with this kind of the resource that is supposedly free to use. Of course, then you don't look at the labor, but yeah. Then, like after this, there was still evidence of exploitation. So the following year, next slide, please. Then they permanently suspended the Schengen visas, which actually forced then. So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs decided that it's evident that this is not tourism, that we can't give out these visas anymore. And suddenly this forces contractual employment, or the change came kind of in the middle of the recruitment season, which was also like a challenge that people were already charged in Thailand, the recruitment fees. And of course, it was a problem for the companies as well. And then it was like left open this possibility that they can use the residence permit for employed person, which then cost more for the pickers to come. Like if the Schengen visa was under 100 euros and this was 500 euros, and it's like a huge money in this kind of economy where you pick the berries. But anyway, and this is what happened in some cases. But as the residence permits were processed by Finnish Immigration Service, they declined quite many applicants, which has not happened with the Schengen visa. Or it was like they interviewed people issuing the visa, and they've said that routinely they basically give it to everyone. If you have like unpaid fines or something, of course, then you can't be issued the visa. But so there was like different type of regulation, and then of course like employment contract. Interestingly, like under the generally applicable collective agreement, what's interesting here is that then it's kind of negotiated with partners who don't have any contact, because of obviously these people are not members of the union, while there is an attempt to unionize in Thailand among the berry pickers, but this is kind of not recognized in Finland. And at the same time, I'm not saying like kind of not advocating for this, but interestingly, fair trade certificate, like some of the companies who were actually prosecuted for human trafficking, they collaborated with fair trade program for, I guess, obvious reasons. And but this negotiation had also contact with the pickers, and they were like had different ideas of what to bring in the negotiation table. So the fair trade pilot had like a very different take on how the employment contract should look. So this was last year, and now finally, like after this, while we are still recovering from the shock and revelation that these people were exploited in the Finnish forests, Finland now, next slide please, passed or amended the Seasonal Workers Act. And the amendment was quite simply that they added that it applies also on a forestry sector and not just agriculture. And that was that. And interestingly, like in the parliamentary hearings, there was a lot of now after this shock, or it's been like very big news in Finland. So now everyone is just horrified about the human trafficking and exploitation, but also very convinced that with this Seasonal Workers Act, this is all dealt with, and now we can move on, which I think is a very dangerous area. Okay, now I'm overreacting. It's also said that, yeah, it's still risky sometimes, but there is this sense of relief. And interestingly, also, this goes now back to the embassies to process. And I think it's also something when we think about like, if there is this like risk screening. So the Finnish Migration Service has done quite a lot of work in pre-screening risks for human trafficking, and they have more resources for that than, according to my understanding, the embassies who are issuing the visas. But this is seen like it's more where it's a lighter and more flexible procedure, so it fits to this just in time. We need to get the forestry or agricultural work quickly. So this was basically what I wanted to say. I have a last slide, but kind of, I think you can see that one of the things that I thought is central here is that from this debate that we need to amend labor law, and this doesn't fit to the Finnish idea what's labor, how you can even like manage people in the forest. It's with political will, and it's quite like a small change in the practices of governing migration that then changes people's like labor market status. But that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Minna. So we will continue with Andrea's presentation. Even though we go to a different country, we stay kind of in the same forests. And we will go to Sweden. So let me find your presentation.
Yes.
Up.
Can I sit next to you?
Yes, yes, you can. You can. Voilà.
Yes.
And let me share it as well. And you can. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I didn't even wait. I didn't even introduce you. So, so this is Andrea Jossa, who is a senior lecturer in labor law at Kristianstad University in Sweden. Andrea, please, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Marco, for inviting me, and thanks for listening. Thanks for participating in person or online. I think that this research seminar has been very interesting so far, and now we cross the border, but we stay in the same forest. And I will discuss a bit about the recent developments in the regulation of the berry pickers in the Swedish forest. Yeah, so temporary labor migrants in the Swedish forest, recent developments in the socio-legal construction of the berry pickers. And yes, I will just say a couple of words about the premises of my work. First of all, it's really a pleasure to be here to think about these things, because I've been doing some work in a short research project on agricultural workers and migration in Sweden a few years ago, 2020, 2021. But now I have a project on minimum wage and the minimum wage directive, and all of a sudden the minimum wage has become extremely relevant for labor migrants and the regulation of labor migration in Sweden, because as I will explain, the government has introduced a wage requirement for receiving work permit in Sweden, and this all of a sudden clashes, as I will say, with the model of the autonomous regulation of the labor market in Sweden. But my premise is that I think has been highlighted so far also by other presenters is that migration law basically fragments the labor market. So the labor market is fragmented through the proliferation of different migration regimes, not only labor migration, but in general migration. And of course, here I refer to what has been already mentioned by Minna, so the work of Mezzader and Nelson on borders as method. On the other hand, so what the point that I want to make is that, as also Bridget Anderson, migration scholar Bridget Anderson, has emphasized, migration law has become a tool of labor market governance, because with all these different regime of migration, regime of labor migration, also different rights are attached, different enforcement mechanisms are attached. So the law understands these different categories of migrants differently. So these are the premises. So please, next slide. Now I would like to contextualize a bit my presentation. On the one hand, I will start by saying 2 words about the Swedish model of labor market regulation, because it's important to understand how the berry picking industry basically is a sector that is outside of this model. So the Swedish model is grounded on the autonomous regulation, on autonomous collective bargaining. Collective agreements have a central role. There is no public intervention, especially in wage setting. So the state, in general, as public authority, has to stay away from labor market regulation, and this somehow has increased even in the latest years. And labor market parties have a primary role in monitoring and regulating the labor market, and in particular, the unions have a primary role in monitoring the enforcement, the correct enforcement of collective agreements. But they need members in the workplace in order to access the workplace. And this is, of course, a problem in the context of berry picking. Now, the other context, it's about the Swedish regime for labor migration. In 2008, the center right-wing government liberalized labor migration regime in Sweden completely. So Sweden all of a sudden went from a labor migration regime based on labor market tests, where the parties could actually oversee which sectors had labor shortages and agree on certain quotas and so on, to a system that the OECD has defined as the most liberal in the world, because it's entirely employer-driven. So in order to receive work permit, there is the need that an employer has offered you a contract of employment, regardless of the sector, regardless of eventual labor shortages. But since 2016, Sweden is experiencing a paradigm shift in migration policy at large, so not only labor migration, following what is usually referred to as migration crisis. The then social democratic government decided to restrict the migration regime, basically making asylum temporary and in need of renewal. And I mean, we don't go into that direction, but employment was the only way to get permanent residence, is the only way to get permanent residence. More recently, since 2018, there has been also very much attention towards the issue of human exploitation at work. And what is interesting is that, first of all, there has been a reform of the criminal code to introduce the crime of labor exploitation. And at the same time, now there are two parallel reform processes. One that tackles labor migration, and one that tackles what has been defined as working life criminality, which includes both companies that circumvent rules in terms of social security, collective agreements, but in general also competition law and other legal framework, and exploitation of work, so working under unreasonable working conditions. And the other one is restriction to labor migration, which I will say something about it. But just to say that the main aim of the Swedish government, that now changed in 2022 from social democrat to right-wing, is to attract high skills workers and to keep away low skills workers, or workers in sectors that are low paid, to say it with other words. So it's really often a matter of perspective. And this is really like the latest governmental inquiries from last week about working life criminality. Then there are discussions about the labor migration. There are certain proposals from governmental inquiries that are not yet formal proposal by the government, but still it's quite very topical issue. And berry picking is in the middle of these two parallel reforms. So again, just to say one word about seasonal workers in Swedish agri-food sector at large. Thank you, Marco. So Sweden, as Finland, is very scarcely populated, but there are a lot of forests. Not so much of land is farmed. So basically, the agricultural sector in Sweden is divided between fields in the south and then forest in the north, and the north of Sweden basically starts just northern of Stockholm. So it's quite a huge part of the territory of Sweden that is considered north and where berries actually grow. Who does this agricultural work? It's mostly seasonal workers or migrant workers from Thailand that pick berries, and also in the south, EU migrants or EU citizens that reside in Sweden, regardless of how long they've been living there. Recruitment happens often through temporary work agency, but also through intermediaries, informal contract, informal channels, and often, especially in the south, in the fields, they are employed with 0-hour contracts. So the income is very shifting. So because basically in winter there is no work to be done, so the employer do not want to pay for work that is not done. So basically they're paid by season. Predominance of small companies and very low collective agreement coverage overall, around 54%. It sounds high. In Sweden, the average is 88. So it's almost a little more than half of the average. Yes, please. So now, what is specific about berry picking in Sweden? Yes. As also Minna has mentioned, I think that there is this extremely interesting element that is at the core of the evolution of an industry on berry picking. The fact that berries grow wild in Swedish forest and in Finnish forest. And then there is this Allemansrätt that basically gives public access and the freedom to pick those berries, regardless of ownership of the property. And I don't know in Finland, but in Sweden, Allemansrätt is constitutionalized. It's a constitutional right that is defined as an exception to private property. So no one can force anyone else not to enter their land and pick berries, mushrooms, I mean, it's very limited. There are certain, of course, there are restrictions, but it is an exception to private property. So berries grow wild. So the industry is basically only labor-based. But at the same time, berries are extremely valuable as cosmetic product, as a pharmaceutical product, and of course as a food product as well. Now, the fact that is free to pick berries in Sweden meant that first, at the beginning, it was basically called free pickers that used to pick berries, and then sold it to local companies or even bigger companies, but on the local level. This progressively, so there are research that shows how this progressively has been industrialized in terms of the process. So from free pickers and informal workers that worked outside of any employment contract, there has been a shift towards supply chains of provision of labor, mostly, if not entirely, if we speak about berry picking, from Thailand, as also in Finland. So in short, the industry works like this. So Thai workers are employed by a recruitment agency in Thailand, who are the employers formally. Then this recruitment agency have contract with Swedish or even Finnish, or anyway, Sweden, Nordic-based berry companies to provide, to pick berries. So it's the Thai-based agency that applies for the work visa. And of course, recruitment happens often through informal channels, personal channels, but what many research and also investigations have shown is that Thai workers have to pay almost 3,000 euro for all the paperwork for the trip that is arranged by this recruitment agency, who also works as a travel agency. And then at the end of the season, what they gain from working the full season picking berries is around 1,500 euro that they can bring back in Thailand, which, of course, it's low if we consider Swedish standards, but it might be quite significant amount of money back in Thailand. Yes, just to show the volume of berry picking in terms of work permits in Sweden. These are the numbers from 2023. On a total of 20,800 work permits issued by the Migration Office, 5,200 were for berry picking and agricultural workers. the majority of which is berry pickers from Thailand. I think it's like 90% of those are from of those work permits are issued to workers coming from Thailand. Just on the margin, I always mention this when I show this table, because the second largest group is IT experts. So it's really, you see, the largest groups are the highly paid, the lowest paid. So it's really the two opposite segments of the labor market. I think it's always interesting to mention that when we talk about labor market and work permits in Sweden. Thank you. Now, in Poland, Kamil has mentioned that there is very little public attention. In Sweden, it's the opposite. There has been an overexposition of working conditions for berry pickers in the forest. And maybe it's related to what you, Minna, said about the significance, cultural significance of berries in Nordic, in the Nordic culture. So now I just collected a few articles. So already in 2011, Sweatwatch, so an NGO, mentioned draw attention to foreign berry pickers that are exploited. And then the ultimate collection of the ultimate journalist investigation came in 2023. Is that it's the end, Dagens Nyheter, which is the most authoritative newspaper in Sweden, that says basically it's an interviews with different pickers. It says berry picking in Sweden was the worst time of my life because of the working conditions. Yeah, very moderate position, but I mean, and it's a collection of articles and so on, but this is just to show how much attention media has put on this, which has reflected on the need for public authorities to intervene and do something about it. Thank you, Marco. So, as I said already, berry picking seems to be outside of the model, of the Swedish model. And what is interesting is that from the union side, another difference maybe with Poland is that in Sweden, the unions have really tried to address this issue. But of course, it's been really difficult. But in order to re-embed this industry within the Swedish model, what the unions did was to basically assign berry picking to the largest union in 2009, which is the Municipal Workers Union. And besides being the largest union, the logic of giving them the mandate to negotiate with berry companies was also because the Municipal Workers Union already organized certain workers in the green sectors, like gardening and public gardening and so on. So they assume to have a certain knowledge about the green sector. What the union does is to sign collective agreements with the Thailand-based agency. And this has been successful in the sense of when I talk, because for this project on minimum wage, when I decided to take a spin-off and look at the minimum wage for migrants, I also did some interviews with the union officers that work in this field. She said that has been quite successful in terms of signing collective agreements. So also because when the Thai agency needs to apply for the work permit, they need to show to the migration office that the employment contract respects the collective agreement. So by having already signed a collective agreement with the union, they show that they are in compliance with the terms and conditions that apply in the sector, and therefore it's easier to get the work permit for those workers. So what this trade union officer said is that the coverage for berry picking of collective agreements, it's 100%. So all companies have this collective agreement. But what is that it's difficult is to monitor that this collective agreement is actually applied, because often there is the practice of forcing berry pickers to sign another contract on the side in which they have to return part of the salary that they are entitled to according to the collective agreement. I will speed up. But I mean, then there are certain mechanisms, regional trade union officers that monitor, and but anyway, it's difficult because of the fields and basically the forests that are remote, and also seasonal cycle that basically makes that the workers are incentivized to self-exploitation because they're paid by weight, so they want to work as much as possible because because berries last few weeks, so they need to pick as much as possible. Yeah, maybe we can now, because this is a bit complex. This is where I am right now with my research, and I don't claim that I will be exhaustive. So please ask me if you don't understand or if there are doubts, because what is happening right now is that there has been a reform of the labor migration regime, for which now to receive a work permit, you need to show that your employment contract gives you 80% of the Swedish median wage. And this means that the migrant that applies for a work permit needs to demonstrate that they will earn 2,500 euros. And this is significantly higher than what a berry picker would make, and what also other professions would make, actually. So it's not exactly, not only, I will say that. So I don't go into the technicalities because this has been done by changing the Alien Act from the requirement to make a living to the requirement to achieve a good livelihood by the Social Democratic government. The right-wing government entered into force 2022, 2023. They adopted the regulation in which this achieve to good a livelihood equal 80% of the median wage. So they gave a number to this concept. Yes, and before that, the migration office would issue a visa if the employment contract would give around 1,100 euros. So it's more than double. Now there is a proposal to increase this to 100%. So it would be 3,000 something. We can go. Exactly. So now the proposal from a governmental inquiry is to increase the wage requirement to the median wage, so to 3,000 euro. That would apply to all work permits and also to prolong the work permit. The proposal includes a system of exception where the labor market parties would agree on which sectors have labor shortages that would be exempted from this system. But berry pickers would be entirely excluded from this system. So the proposal of the governmental inquiry is to exclude berry pickers from the possibility to apply for a work permit, but not to exclude berry pickers as such, but to rechannel berry picking from the work permit, the general scheme for work permit, to the seasonal workers permit regime, which is more restrictive and which requires that the employer is based in Sweden. The reaction of the labor market parties, it's also quite interesting. It is also based on the interviews that I've made. LO is the blue collar trade union confederation. They are in favor because they think that the liberalization of labor migration has gone too far. They want to restrict it. Kommunal, the union that signs those collective agreements so far, I will mention this, thinks that is good because it will put bad companies out of the market. But at the same time, they said that they will decrease drastically the number of companies that will sign a collective agreement. And the employer side, they're upset, to say the least, both in the green sector, but also the confederation. They think that it's ineffective, it sends bad messages, because it will be very difficult for employers to recruit workers. Now, this is the impact on berry picking. 2024, 1 year after the introduction of the wage requirement, 80%, the number of work permit issued for berry picking dropped to 1,300. Very like one fourth almost. No one picks berries. No, who picks the berries? Informal workers again. So we are back to the scheme that was before. So now it's been EU migrants or long-term resident migrants that decide to go and and make a living out of those weeks to pick berries. So that there are articles from journalism actually that say that it's private person that can earn a few thousand krona per day by picking berries. And about what you said, this is a spin-off as well. The Comunal, so again, the local branch of the Comunal, the Municipal Workers Union in Umea in the north, for nurses. They said, okay, but why migrants that need to receive this salary and our salary is lower than that? We also want that salary. So introducing a minimum wage requirement for migrants might create a spillover into the autonomous labor market regulation regime in Sweden by increasing demands or like affecting the bargaining. Now, the union said that is not going to happen because the system is controlled, blah, 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 blah. But it's still a matter of fact that nurses, teachers, mostly nurses, but yeah, nurses, or school preschool teachers also, the salary is lower than the requirement for migrant workers that is applied now. I'm almost done. Future developments it's quite interesting because I mean everything is on development right now. One thing that is interesting to mention is that since this year, the mandate to negotiate and to represent berry pickers from the union side will move from the Municipal Workers Union to the Food Workers Union. And they have this slogan from Jord till Bord, so from the ground to the table. So because now with this shift, the Food Workers Union will organize workers from the ground, from the soil to the table, so the whole agri-food chain. At the same time, yeah, so there is a tendency, there is a trend that politically, from the legal side, wants to push berry pickers to apply for seasonal work permits instead. And last week, a new governmental inquiry in work-life criminality field has proposed to introduce actually more effective enforcement tools to tackle labor exploitation, also for berry pickers. For instance, the possibility to receive temporary residence if you have a legal case, so the possibility to be represented by the Equality Ombudsman in case concerning labor rights for migrants. So now to conclude, the next slide, I want to make 2 points. One is that the agricultural sector in Sweden and also the berry picking industry is characterized by this dichotomy. So on the one hand, this different spatial temporal legal dimension. Temporary labor migrants, so migrants that are temporarily working in Sweden, but also temporary labor migrants. So labor migrants who come to Sweden and work temporarily, or, sorry, temporary labor migrants, so migrants that have been living in Sweden for long, for a few weeks of berry picking, they are labor. Maybe they change sector afterwards. Or maybe they are unemployed, but they are migrants that live in Sweden that perform temporarily. And then there is also this tension between labor migrants, work permit, and the seasonal worker regime, as I said, that requires, for instance, that the employer is based in Sweden. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I think that berry pickers in Sweden are in the middle of 2 sets of reforms that seems to have opposite aims, because on the one hand, there is the restriction of labor migration in low-skilled, or sorry, not low-skilled, low-paid jobs to criminalize migration almost, I wouldn't say almost, to criminalize migration in certain sectors and to renationalize the labor migration regime. And on the other hand, there is the whole set of reforms into the working life criminality dimension, which instead seems to move towards giving more rights to labor migrants, especially in order to provide for a more effective enforcement mechanism, especially in labor disputes and especially in wage disputes. So it's a bit, everything is in development. So that's what makes it quite interesting. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And sorry for the terrible role of having to keep the time. So as always, we will open the floor for questions, which can also cover, of course, Mina's presentation. And Mina, you can also come to the table for answering the questions. I will check the chat because I thought there was something. No, this was from before. Okay, there was a question about unemployment. I think this was also about Audrey's presentation about the possibility of accessing unemployment benefits if someone is unemployed during their temporary stay in the country. Can they be unemployed and be in the country? So in case of Audrey, the answer is no. I will answer I saw the answer from the public. What about the berry pickers? What's their situation? Since they are paid at piece rate, if I understood correctly, in both situations, can they end up in essentially poverty? And do they have access to any welfare state provision while in Finland or in Sweden?
You go first.
Okay. Well, I mean, the regulation of work permits in Sweden is very strict, so you cannot overstay. You have now, I mean, I would need to double check, but you have a few weeks in which you are entitled to look for a new job if you lose the job, which means also that the access to social welfare rights is quite restricted. And especially now, since we're talking about the possibility to, or not the possibility, the effort to push berry pickers to seasonal work regime, it's even stricter because you cannot receive the permit if the Alien Act, the Swedish Alien Act says that if it's shown that the worker has the idea of not leaving the country after but this comes from the directive in the end. So I would say that is quite limited, but there is now the governmental inquiry that I mentioned. It proposes also to extend the duration of seasonal work permit from 6 to 9 months. So somehow this would make, I mean, just like the work period longer, but I think that the access to social rights it's quite restricted.
Yeah, similarly, also, so the seasonal work is now, it's a new regime that hasn't been implemented yet, or like the law came in power like 3 weeks ago or something. But I think with the forestberry pickers in Finland, the main issue is that there's been like a wide acceptance that these people come for the berry season that is less than 3 months. So it's a very short period, and they also have like a big incentives to go back, which kind of because they've maybe taken loans. Some of them are farmers in Thailand, and then after the berry season, there starts to be harvesting season there, and also the recruiters, brokers are kind of controlling. They used to control that people don't overstay their visas, and that's why the tourist visa thing worked out so well. So it's very much about this like shortness of the season that then might prevent people even looking into the social rights they theoretically might have.
Thank you. There is Vera Pavlu wants to ask a question. You can switch on your mic and camera, Vera, and we'll happily hear you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. A very interesting presentation. So I just had a question for Andrea. I don't know if I was just curious, Andrea, whether you have any insights about how are these networks created and sustained over time? Because from the little knowledge and interest that I have in Sweden, I know this issue with the Thai berry pickers has been going on for such a long time. And I'm just wondering, first of all, why Thailand? Like, what is behind this story? and whether there have been any efforts, like bilateral even, to address some of these issues throughout the years. Thanks.
Thank you, Vera, for your question. I mean, it's a valid and very interesting question. I don't have an answer myself but I know that there are research. There is research in this field that shows how White Island, because I mean, this is what I like. It's not my primary knowledge, but there are research on this. That is basically because there have been not like is almost a stereotype of the Swedish man that goes to Thailand and get married. And through this, basically through informal channels, this system has been put in place. But my understanding is also that there is very little knowledge from the Swedish side about what happens in Thailand. Like all the reports that you read, all the governmental inquiries that you read, Work Environment Agency report, they don't know much about what's happening actually there. They know how it works here, but there is no much. It's kind of an interesting question because no one asks themselves like why Thailand. So at least in those governmental inquiries, I mean. And then I think, I mean, it seems that there are quite a bit of effort to tackle this issue. And recently, the unions not the unions, sorry, the government has started collaboration with through the embassy in Thailand, with the local authorities in Thailand. But all the effort now are focusing on public authorities in Sweden. So this work-life criminality discourse that has emerged is really about putting together different public authorities that works with criminality of companies from different fields and collaborate with the unions to tackle, among other sectors, the berry picking.
Okay, thanks Vera also for the question, and thanks Andrea. Any other questions for? Oh, here's a question. Okay. What happens? Okay, so this was always about the situation in case they do not earn enough or they lose the job. What happens to them? Especially in terms of their ability to survive and have a roof in the country during that time.
In the country during while they're in the Nordics. Yeah, I think the biggest problems kind of come for people when they go back. So if Andrea was saying that people might earn like 1,500 euro per season, but I think that's also it varies. And of course, these are berries that go without cultivation. We have dry summers, we have very wet summers, and maybe there's not always berries. Maybe you get sick, maybe you're not able to get that many berries, but you've taken out loan because you're paid so little that to be interested in this type of work, you don't have the money to travel for fun between two continents. So you have a debt, most likely. And when you go back with no money, maybe like with 200 euros, and that might not cover the debt, and then because they informal loans or the informal economy in Thailand is quite big. Like I think some estimates say that 40% of the household loans are not from official financial establishment, but also from loan sharks and that kind of thing. So it can be, and it's been documented that for some it's a very spiral down. So I think that's the most severe thing. The way it works, at least in Finland, I think it's quite similar. That you're kind of you are deducted from the berries you pick every day. You are deducted the housing and food costs. So you are kind of sort of okay maybe, but then you are with zero income, or maybe you are like in the worst case, you're minus the recruitment agency says that you picked so little that you owe us money.
Yeah. No, I mean, I can just mention one very brief thing about this, because this, yes, of course, the fact that in Sweden, if you lose the job or if your contract ends, you need to leave the country. It makes very difficult to have access to, for instance, the entitlements according to social security. And there are cases of workers that have been how do you say? Expelled, but still have a legal case, deported, yes, still have a legal case in the country. And this is one of what I think it's a good thing of this new governmental inquiries that the little I read, because it's from Monday, is that yeah, they suggest to introduce a temporary residence permit if you have a legal case about your employment. So because essentially that's a problem.
Yeah. Well, if you want to go to the authorities, that's also an alternative in Finland. But because of this, I think the challenge here is that when we look at what happens in the Nordic countries, then like the reality in Thailand, which then is very much about the lived reality of people. If they have a little land, they have their family, they have the debt, it's just kind of not factored in this kind of residence permit for victims of human trafficking or something like that. It's a challenge. It maybe doesn't reflect the situation they are in.
Yes, you have to you have to come forward. So we'll take a last question from the room. Yes.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name's Kayla. I'm an American Fulbright scholar doing a project on labor. So I just want to say that the great presentation. As an American, the everyman's right just totally boggles my mind. I love it, but you know, we love to privatize everything there. So, but it reminded me of in the U.S. there were some high-profile cases of Nestle like stealing water from springs that were public springs in the US, in like California, where they took billions of gallons of water and then didn't pay. They made a bunch of money off of it and didn't pay for it. And so I was just wondering if there's a divide in the Nordic countries between labor groups and environmental groups of whether this industry should even exist in the first place because it's so extractive, or if it's just like a foregone conclusion that it's already happened. And then are there any sort of like local community efforts to sort of like reclaim the forests for themselves or anything like that? Because it's just sort of wondering what the total dynamics are, and if it's like a net positive economically for the countries, if the companies are paying taxes to be there, or if they're locally, the economy is like making a lot of money selling the berries or anything, just like sort of what that landscape is. Thanks.
Yeah, well, at least in Finland, actually, interestingly, it's the landowners are not loving this type of application of the so-called everyman's right, and it's been previously debated that whether is like when the picking is for industrial purposes, and I think now with the change of legislation, it might be that there's an interest to bring this up again, that whether it's in the spirit of everyman's right when it's like contractual employment. But then again, I think in Finland, the berry purchasing companies, even at the time when the pickers were tourists, then in these areas where unemployment is quite high, it was like seen that these tourist pickers facilitate employment for local people. So kind of the trade-off is more there.
It's a great question, and it's a great angle to think about this. I'm not aware of alliances, let's say, from labor unions and environmental associations or groups in Sweden on the specific question of the berry picking, but it would be very worthy and interesting to look at it. But of course, I mean, those companies, it's the thing about probably this is a bit of the difference. I don't know if I understand. Like in Sweden, it's formalized, so you have companies, so they pay taxes. So And you mentioned this, it might be beneficial for those areas because also
Yeah.
in Sweden they are like not underdeveloped, but there is no.
Yeah, well, there is kind of all the old industries are kind of gone, or or there's been nothing in the first place. But the berry purchasing companies that then like freeze the berries and export them, of course they pay taxes, but the picking used to be tax-free, so kind of savage accumulation maybe there.
Okay, thank you very much, Camille. Very quick question. Come on. It's okay, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. We are slightly late, apologies, but it's all fine.
Last question, because this is maybe too general for each of us, because I'm just wondering in terms of Nordic country, is there a space for other sending countries and some workers from other countries? Because you said, Andrea, that the Thailand, Audrey said a lot about the Moroccan workers. I speak with Justina about the Ukrainization, so I'm just wondering, is there any spaces, for example, in Northern countries to recruit workers from other countries? And unfortunately, this is my also reflection, our great presentation, that can be, for example, such policy learning. Unfortunately, that, for example, maybe not, but I can imagine that Polish government try to, inspired by the Northern country to recruit these workers in these exploitative channels and the modes. So it's horrible to listen what is on the ground happen in that countries, but in Poland this is typically different, yes, because we have the neighboring countries, Ukrainians, which are really familiar with Polish society, but like in Sweden or Finland, it's horrible situation for workers, especially such exploitative precariousness situation without any supports, without any welfare benefits access. So it's sorry, this is comments and the questions for you.
Well, I think it's probably Sweden too, but since COVID in particular, Thailand has been also quite restrictive. There is this like you need or whether you need it or not, it's very debatable, but there is this kind of permit to exit the country for labor migration type of thing, and then whether you can do it without or not, it's a whole thing. But also I think this has given the companies an incentive, like they are also looking to other countries of origin because they realize that it's too big of a risk that if Thailand doesn't let people to go. And I think it's quite telling like what type of labor, and this comes also back to the analysis of what type of labor shortage this is, that in Finland there's been an attempt to recruit from refugee camps in Myanmar. So this is where you find potential labor. It wasn't successful, but I think it kind of speaks of the type of labor we are talking about. So, but I think the companies are for sure there is this interest.
All right. So I have to close. I will have to close the meeting. I have to say a few things before. No, you will stay. Don't leave me alone. But before, so I will switch the order. I will do the public service announcement at the beginning, so I don't forget at the end. So for all those who are still with us, we will have our European Birds of Passage halfway conference this summer. It will be on the 30th of June. It will be at the European Parliament here in Strasbourg, and it will be also in a hybrid mode for all those who want to. For all those who want to join online as well. And you will have the full panel of members of European Birds of Passage Research Project and a discussant for each one of us. So join us again on the 30th of June. Now, coming to the actual content, I just wanted to say a few things. I had taken upon myself to talk about spatio-temporal scales inspired by the work of Andrea on legal geography, which was kind of a challenge because that's not my specialty at all. But I will mention a few points. I will arrive at the legal stuff at the end. But I think in terms of space and time, it has mentioned by Andrea as well the question of remoteness. And now there is an aspect of remoteness which is very evident, so I will not deal with it. Yes, the farms are often in remote places. But I want to focus on how remoteness is not just a matter of kilometers, but it's also a matter of transportation, connections, and so on. And you might as well be remote on a farm just 50 kilometers from Warsaw, because there is no bus or train or way to go there. So in a way, you are completely dependent on your employer sometimes to access, go and leave the farm. And in this sense, we should consider this concept of remoteness in the context of transportation and costs and so on, and how does it impact vulnerability, not just in terms of being very far in itself. And second, the question of time, there is this interesting tension of the just-in-time production in agriculture, where you need workers now, today, and you don't even exactly know when the berries are ripe or the fruits needs picking, and this tension with, of course, the workings of migration mechanisms, filtering mechanisms, and so on. And a lot of attention in migration studies has been paid to the role of time, but mostly in terms of refugees and family reunification and the politics of waiting and temporal governance. And I think there is this dead angle on temporary labor migration schemes and the role of time in those schemes, because of course there is an evident role of temporariness. Yes, you have a limit and a certain number of months to be there, but also the role of time of production in the legal construction of these schemes. And our whole discussion, of course, it's very much an application of the insight from Mezzadar and Nilsson. It has been mentioned of the role of migration schemes into filtering and organizing the segmentation of the labor market. We have seen it mentioned in different ways. Now, coming to the more legal, barely perspective, I think there is an interesting point here on the inability of the law to capture scale, using, again, a geographical concept, meaning the law is hyper-focused, hyper-zoomed into the pixelated reality of individuals. And you look at the very individual history of this migrant today in the 6 months, and you will say, oh yes, of course, they are a temporary labor migrant. They come and they go for 6 months. But if you were to adopt a relative different scale, and you just switch from the micro scale of the individual to the meso scale of the economic operation of the company, of the intermediaries who constantly, year after year, use temporary labor migrants, you would have immediately a very different picture of their status of temporariness, whereas they're very much structurally there and permanently used. And even more so if you switch to the macro scale and you look into the labor market at sectoral, let's say, level, into, for instance, agriculture, but even in other sectors. Today we are talking about agriculture. You would immediately realize how this supposed temporariness is very much a product of this zooming in of legal regulation into this very micro scale. I said pixelated in the sense that you look at this picture and you look so close and you only see the pixels and the little colors, and you can't see actually the picture composed by those pixels. So the challenge for legal thought, I would say, in dealing with this, in providing fair working conditions, social justice for temporary labor migrants, is very much into this ability of rescaling our legal instruments and being able to capture this continuity, this replacement of one migrant with another one season after season, and how we can tackle this situation with legal tools to make this emerge in legal thinking, and what would be the conclusions of the rescaling. And that's everything I had to say. Very short, because of course we are a little bit late. For that, I apologize. It's a strange Italian obsessed with time. Thank you very much to everybody for being here. Thanks to those who have joined us in person. Thanks to those who have joined us online. And of course, above all, thanks to all the speakers, especially those who have made the trip to join us in Strasbourg. See you again, hopefully, on the 30th of June in person or online. And for the rest, have a nice afternoon if you are in the same time zone, and bon appétit for your lunch. Thank you.